the billionaire woman and her secret past. In a city where glass towers touched the clouds and old family names still weighed more than law, Emma Vale had become a miracle people loved to photograph. She was young, impossibly successful, and rich enough to change the fate of companies with one signature. Yet beneath every composed smile lived a girl she had spent 10 years burying. Tonight, at the grand charity gala of the Harrington Hotel, Emma stood before the same society that had once looked past girls like her, as if poverty were contagious. The conflict inside her was simple and cruel. She had built an empire to prove she was untouchable, but one question, one familiar street, one forgotten face could still drag Emily Rose back into the light. And Emma, who could face boardrooms without blinking, was most afraid of being seen. The ballroom was full of gold, not real gold perhaps, though there was enough of that on wrists, throats, cufflinks, and champagne trays to feed several neighborhoods for a month. It was the gold of chandeliers, of expensive laughter, of evening gowns brushing marble floors with the whisper of money well trained. Crystal glasses trembled lightly whenever applause rose. Cameras waited at the edge of the carpet like patient predators. Emma Vale moved through it all with the grace of someone who had learned that beauty could be armor. Her dress was ivory silk, simple at first glance, devastating under light. Her dark hair was pinned low, diamond earrings trembling against her neck when she turned. She did not wear too much jewelry. She never did. Wealth, she had discovered, screamed only when it was insecure. Vale, this way please. Emma, one photo for global finance. Vale, congratulations on the education initiative. She gave each camera the same slight turn of her shoulders, the same calm smile, the same gaze that had once made a magazine call her the coldest hope of modern capitalism. The phrase had amused her board and offended her assistant. Emma herself had only folded the magazine shut and placed it in the recycling bin. Cold was not the right word. Frozen, perhaps. There were things that froze because winter touched them. There were other things that froze because if they moved, they would bleed. Beside her, Grace Lynn kept pace with a tablet in one hand and a soft warning in her eyes. Grace had the rare talent of looking gentle. While organizing a battlefield, she leaned toward Emma just enough to be heard beneath the music. After the scholarship announcement, 3 questions. I already told the press pool no personal questions. Emma's smile did not change. That has never stopped them. No, Grace said, but it makes them look rude when they try. Emma almost laughed. It would have been real and therefore dangerous. Across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore stood with a glass of champagne untouched between his fingers. He was handsome in the way inherited portraits were handsome. Clean lines, pale confidence, and a smile that never reached the part of him capable of calculation. His family had donated the venue for tonight's gala, a generous gesture reported everywhere that morning. Though Emma knew generosity often came cheaper than taxes, Richard lifted his glass slightly when their eyes met. Emma nodded back. There were rivals who shouted across negotiation tables. Richard was not one of them. He preferred silence, pressure, and the slow tightening of invisible wires. Whitmore has been watching you all evening, Grace murmured. Let him, Emma said. People who watch too carefully usually want something. Emma looked toward the stage where the foundation logo glowed behind the podium. The Vale, Future Scholars Fund, underprivileged girls, full tuition, housing, legal protection, emergency aid, mentorship. Not simply scholarship wrapped in elegant wording, but escape routes disguised as opportunity. Her fingers tightened around the small speech cards Grace had prepared. He wants me to remember my place, Emma said softly. Grace turned her head. And do you, Emma? Smiled then, and this time it held steel, better than anyone. When she stepped onto the stage, applause rose like warm rain. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, polished and expectant. The room became a sea of approval. Approval Emma had learned. could be withdrawn much faster than kindness. She stood behind the podium, looked over the crowd, and allowed the silence to settle. 10 years ago, she began, a scholarship changed the course of my life. It was a safe sentence, edited, sanded down, true enough to survive, false enough to protect her. No one here needed to know the full shape of that life. They did not need to know about a girl with wet shoes in winter, standing outside a bakery and counting coins twice because hunger made numbers blur. They did not need to know about the school uniform bought secondhand, the sleeves always a little too long, to hide yellowing bruises from a stepfather's temper, and the careless cruelty of crowded hallways. They did not need to know about Emily Rose. Voice steady. Talent exists everywhere, but access does not. Ambition is not born only in wealthy homes. Courage does not wait for permission from society. Tonight, Vale Global commits $50 million to create a fund for girls who have been told, directly or quietly, that survival is the most they should hope for. The applause came instantly, full and flattering. Emma lowered her eyes for half a second. $50 million. A number large enough to impress the room. A number small enough to make her ashamed, because a hungry child did not need millions. She needed one adult to believe her, one door not to close, one lie not to be stronger than her truth. After the speech came the press line. Grace guided her toward the backdrop. Flashbulbs burst white against Emma's vision. Mums Vale, how will applicants be selected? Through a partnership with independent educators and social workers, Emma answered. We want to reach girls who are often missed by traditional systems. Will Vale Global administer the fund directly? With outside oversight. Why girls specifically? Because poverty is never only financial for them. It becomes safety, reputation, access, and silence. Several reporters nodded, already shaping headlines. Then a younger woman near the front lifted her recorder. She looked nervous, which made Emma pay attention. The ambitious ones were often careless. The nervous ones sometimes asked the question that mattered. Val, the reporter said, you speak about this cause with unusual conviction. Why does it matter so much to you personally? Grace's posture sharpened. Emma froze. Only half a second. Less, perhaps. Too brief for most of the room to notice, but not brief enough for Emma. Herself, the chandeliers blurred. The perfume and champagne turned into damp pavement and cheap detergent. For an instant she was 16 again, pressing one hand over a torn cuff, hearing laughter behind her. Thief. Poor girls always know how to take what isn't theirs. If she cried, they would win. If she shouted, they would call her unstable. If she stayed silent, the lie would become history. Emma breathed in. Because no child should learn that shame has a smell, she thought. Because hunger sounds like coins in a pocket. Because I once disappeared and everyone was relieved, but she said, because potential should never be wasted by circumstance. It was elegant. It was empty. It satisfied the room. The reporter smiled, perhaps unaware that she had touched a scar. Grace ended the questions immediately after. Emma shook hands for another 40 minutes, accepted praise, endured admiration, and let donors tell her how inspiring she was. Richard Whitmore approached near the end, his smile as smooth as expensive cream. A moving speech, Emma. Thank you, Richard. Very personal, there it was. A needle slipped between silk threads. Emma looked at him. Education should be personal to everyone. Of course his eyes held hers a little. Too long. Still, one wonders where such passion begins. One wonders many things at charity galas, she said lightly. Most of them are forgotten by morning. Richard laughed as if she had amused him. But when he stepped away, Emma felt the cold line of his attention remain on her back. By the time she reached her car, the city had turned silver with late-night rain. Her driver, Marcus, held the door open with an umbrella angled over her head. "Home, Miss Vale." Emma looked at the glowing entrance behind her. Inside, people were still drinking beneath chandeliers, warmed by philanthropy and wine. Yes, she said. Home, but home in her life had never been a simple destination. The car slid through avenues lined with boutiques and private clubs. Emma rested her head against the leather seat and finally let her expression fall on her phone. Messages multiplied. Congratulations from board members, invitations from ministers, a brief note from Grace saying, "You handled it well. Rest tonight." Emma typed, "I'm fine then." Deleted it. She placed the phone face down. Rain thickened as they crossed east. Traffic rerouted them away from the main boulevard. Emma noticed only when the buildings changed. Luxury facades gave way to older brick, shuttered laundromats, narrow balconies, neon signs flickering with stubborn life. A corner store with a blue awning appeared beneath a broken street lamp. Her chest tightened. "Marcus," she said. "Yes." "Vale. Why are we here?" "Accident on Wexler Avenue. Navigation sent us through the old district." The old district. Such a harmless phrase for a place that still knew her footprints. Emma sat straighter. The rain blurred the window, but not enough. She recognized the bus stop where she had once waited in February with a fever, pretending she was not cold because pride was the last blanket she owned. She recognized the alley beside the dry cleaner where boys from school had dumped her notebooks after Celia Whitmore accused her of stealing a bracelet. Her hand moved unconsciously to her left wrist. The bracelet had never been found in her bag. It had been found in her locker, wrapped in a scarf she could not afford. That had been enough. Rich girls were believed by default. Poor girls were investigated like habits. The car gave a sudden violent shudder. Marcus cursed under his breath and guided it to the curb. Steam rose faintly from the hood. "I'm sorry, Miss Vale, let me check." Emma looked through the rain across the street. A small pharmacy still had its lights on. Heart's Pharmacy, the sign read in blue letters. Old but clean. Heart, something inside her shifted, not memory exactly, but the sound of a name spoken kindly from another life. Marcus opened the hood. Rain struck his shoulders. After several minutes, he returned to the window. "It'll need roadside assistance. 20, maybe 30 minutes. Would you like me to call another car?" Emma should have said yes. Instead, she looked again at the pharmacy. Warm light spilled through the windows. There were shelves inside, a counter, a small bell above the door, nothing remarkable, nothing dangerous, and yet her pulse had changed. "I'll wait inside," she said. Marcus blinked. "Vale, I can. It's just across the street." She stepped out before caution could dress itself as reason. Rain touched her hair, her silk dress, the diamonds at her ears. For one absurd second she imagined the headlines if anyone photographed her. "Billionaire stranded in forgotten neighborhood." But no cameras waited here. Only wet pavement, tired buildings, and the smell of asphalt after rain. The bell above the pharmacy door rang softly when she entered. Warmth surrounded her at once, carrying the scent of antiseptic, paper bags, herbal lozenges, and something faintly sweet like honey. A radio played low behind the counter. The place was narrow but carefully kept. A row of children's vitamins stood beside discounted umbrellas. Near the back, an elderly man in a brown coat was folding a receipt into his wallet. "I told you," said a male voice from behind the counter. "Take it after food, not before. Your stomach is not my enemy, Mr. Alvarez. Stop treating it like one." The old man grumbled. "You sound like my daughter. She sounds wise. She sounds expensive." The pharmacist laughed. Emma turned toward the sound, and the ears loosened without warning. He was older, of course, broader in the shoulders, calmer in the face. His hair was dark, slightly untidy from a long shift, and his white coat had a pen clipped crookedly at the pocket. But his eyes were the same. Warm brown, steady, with a patience that did not make a performance of itself. Daniel Hart. The name arrived fully then, as if it had been waiting behind a locked door. Daniel, who had once found her crying behind the community clinic after the accusation spread. Daniel, who had been a pharmacy student helping his aunt, who had given her antiseptic for a cut and a sandwich wrapped in a napkin, without asking why she had no money. Daniel, who had stood between her and two boys laughing about thieves, and said, in a voice quiet enough to be frightening, "Leave her alone." He had called her Emmy because that was what she told him, not Emily Rose. Not Emma, Vale Emmy. A girl small enough to fit inside one syllable. The old customer left with a muttered blessing. Daniel looked up. For a moment, Emma forgot how to be photographed. "Hi," he said, with the polite warmth reserved for strangers. "You're soaked strangers." Of course, 10 years had altered her. Money had polished away the visible edges of hunger, her hair, her skin, her posture, even the way she held silence. Everything about Emma Vale had been designed to make Emily Rose unrecognizable. "I'm waiting for my car," she said. Her voice sounded normal. That felt like betrayal. Daniel reached beneath the counter and placed a small folded towel on it. "Here it's clean, not luxurious, but it does the job." Emma stared at the towel. People offered her contracts, partnerships, private islands for weekend retreats. They did not offer her clean towels with no expectation of gratitude beyond simple human sense. "Thank you," she said, taking it. Their fingers did not touch, but she felt the nearness anyway. Daniel studied her with mild concern, not curiosity. "You look like you came from somewhere important. That obvious?" He glanced at her gown, then at the diamond earrings, then deliberately back to her face. "Only a little." Emma gave a small laugh before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both, or perhaps only her. "There's a chair by the heater," he said. "You can wait there. If your driver needs to use the phone or anything, just tell me. My driver has it handled, of course." He smiled, not mockingly. People who wear dresses like that usually have things handled. She should have bristled. Instead, she heard kindness beneath the sentence, not judgment. Emma sat near the heater, the towel folded over her damp hair. Daniel returned to sorting prescriptions, giving her privacy without abandoning her. That, too, struck her painfully. Most people either pressed close to her fame or withdrew from her power. Daniel did neither. He simply allowed her to exist in the room. Her phone vibrated. Marcus, tow truck on the way. Another car arriving in 18 minutes. 18 minutes, not long enough to change a life, too long to keep a heart from remembering. Daniel came around the counter with a paper cup. "Chamomile," he said, "technically for customers, but you look like you need it more than the shelf does." Emma accepted the tea. Steam warmed her face. "You do this for everyone?" "Only stranded women in ball gowns and Mr. Alvarez when he pretends he hates me." She looked down at the cup. "That's a narrow policy. I try to be selective." Rain tapped the windows, somewhere outside. A siren passed and faded. Emma felt the old district pressing against the glass, full of ghosts. Yet here in this small pool of light, the past did not attack. It sat beside her, breathing. Daniel leaned lightly against the counter, keeping a respectful distance. "Rue night?" he asked. Emma thought of the reporter's question, Richard's eyes, the applause that sounded like permission, but not forgiveness. "Successful," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked up. There was no challenge in his tone, only observation, a simple refusal to confuse achievement with peace. For the second time that night, Emma froze. Then she smiled faintly. "You're very direct for someone selling cough drops." "I dispense antibiotics too. It gives me confidence." The warmth in his eyes unsettled her more than any insult could have. She had prepared herself for greed, envy, suspicion, admiration. She had not prepared herself for ordinary gentleness, because ordinary gentleness was where Emily had once almost survived. A memory opened. Rain, not unlike tonight, her wrist bleeding where broken glass had caught her after she slipped behind. Clinic. Daniel wrapping it with gauze, his brows drawn together in concentration. "You should tell someone," young Daniel had said. "No one listens," she had whispered. "I'm listening." At 16, she had not known what to do with that. She still did not. Her hand trembled slightly around the paper cup. A drop of tea slid over the rim and touched her wrist. She set the cup down too quickly. Daniel noticed. "Careful," he said, stepping closer. "Did it burn?" "No, I'm fine." The words came too fast, too practiced. He stopped just beside her chair, close enough now that she could see a faint ink mark on his thumb, a tired crease near his eye. He looked at her wrist where the sleeve of her damp gown had shifted back. The old scar was pale and narrow, crossing the inside of her left wrist like a secret signature. Emma saw the moment recognition did not arrive, but memory did. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. The friendly professionalism softened into something quieter, more searching. Her heart began to pound so hard she thought he might hear it. She pulled her hand back, but not quickly enough. Daniel's gaze remained on the scar for one breath, then lifted to her face. He did not accuse. He did not demand. He only looked at her as if time had placed a question between them and asked him to be gentle with it. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that even the rain seemed to pause. "I knew a girl once who had the same scar." The sentence landed softly, yet Emma felt it like a hand, pressing against an old bruise. For a second, the small pharmacy seemed to tilt. The shelves of cough syrup, bandages, and vitamin bottles blurred into long strips of color. Rain tapped against the window with patient fingers, and somewhere behind the counter, an old refrigerator hummed as if nothing in the world had changed. But Emma had changed. Emily Rose would have frozen with fear. Emily Rose would have lowered her head, afraid that someone had finally found another reason to laugh, another reason to point at her patched sleeves and say she did not belong. Emma Vale had learned to smile through boardroom betrayals, hostile interviews, and charity galas filled with people who praised her donations while searching for flaws in her accent. She had learned to answer questions without revealing anything that could be used as a knife. So she did what Emma Vale always did. She controlled her face. "A common kind of scar," she said, gently pulling her sleeve down. "Childhood accidents are very democratic." Daniel watched her for a moment. Not suspiciously. That would have been easier to resist. Suspicion could be met with denial, with distance, with polished coldness. His gaze was only quiet. "Maybe," he said. The single word held no pressure, and that frightened her more than interrogation. He turned away first, as if giving her room to breathe, and picked up a small packet of medicine from a shelf behind the counter. "You said you had a headache." "I didn't say that. You pressed your fingers here twice." He touched his own temple briefly. "And you've been squinting at the light." Emma almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she had spent years surrounded by people whose entire careers depended on observing her moods, needs, and weaknesses. Yet most of them only noticed what could change stock prices, headlines, invitations. Daniel noticed pain because pain mattered to him. "I'm fine," she said again. This time, even she heard how unconvincing it sounded. He did not challenge her. He poured more hot water into another paper cup and set a painkiller beside it. "Take it only if you haven't had anything similar in the last 6 hours. And eat something soon. Medicine on an empty stomach is not friendly. Not friendly." The phrase was so ordinary that it opened a door somewhere in her memory. A younger Daniel under a school stairwell, rain dripping from his hair, holding out half a sandwich wrapped in thin plastic. A boy from the senior class had kicked at Emily's shoe earlier that day, laughing when the sole flapped loose like a broken mouth. Scholarship Cinderella, someone had called her. "Careful, your carriage is leaking." She had hidden behind the gym building at lunch, wet socks inside torn shoes, stomach aching with hunger and shame. Daniel had found her there by accident, carrying a lunchbox with a cracked lid. He had not asked why she was crying. He had simply sat down beside her, on the concrete step, and said, "My mother packed too much. If I bring it home, she'll think I'm sick." Even then, Emily had known. His sandwich had been small. The egg inside was thin, stretched with cucumber, and too much pepper. But he broke it evenly, placed half in her hand, and then looked away so she would not have to thank him with a face full of tears. Afterward, he had taken a roll of clear tape from his bag and taped the sole of her shoe, as carefully as if repairing something valuable. Emma had forgotten the taste of many expensive meals, dinners on rooftops in Paris, private tastings in Tokyo, wine served by men in white gloves, dishes described like poetry. She had never forgotten that sandwich. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked. Emma returned to the pharmacy with effort. Her hand was wrapped around the paper cup so tightly it had begun to bend. "Yes." She forced a small smile. "Just tired. What brought you to this neighborhood in this weather?" The question was natural, harmless. Still, it struck the wall she had built around herself. "My car had some trouble," she said. "I was passing through from where work. What kind of work?" There it was, the simplest question in the world, and somehow the most dangerous. If she said finance, he might ask which firm. If she said investments, he might connect her to the face that sometimes appeared on business channels, elegant and severe beneath studio lights. If she said Vale Foundation, he might remember the gala coverage, the interviews, the carefully edited story of a self-made woman who never mentioned the girl she had buried. So Emma chose a truth that was also a hiding place. "Consulting," she said. "I help companies fix problems." Daniel smiled faintly. "That sounds either very useful or very vague, usually both." For the first time that night, something light passed between them. It was small, fragile, but real. Emma felt it touch the edge of her exhaustion and warm it. He did not recognize her. Not as Emma Vale, the billionaire chairwoman whose face appeared on magazine covers and charity banners. Not as the woman who could move markets with an announcement, who had bodyguards waiting in black cars, who owned buildings with lobbies larger than this entire street. Here, under the flat fluorescent light, with rain-damp hair and no makeup left to hold her features into the correct shape, she was only a woman in a borrowed silence. Emma, just Emma. Her phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. She ignored it. It vibrated again. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He moved behind the counter to serve an elderly man, buying cough drops and a pack of herbal patches. Emma sat near the window, watching the rain turn neon signs into trembling colors on the pavement. The phone did not stop. Finally, she looked down. 23 missed calls from Grace Lynn. 14 messages. "Where are you?" Security lost visual after the east exit. "Emma, answer me. The press pool is still outside the hotel. If anyone sees you alone in that district, they will invent a story before morning. Please, just send one word." Emma closed her eyes. Guilt moved through her, sharp and familiar. Grace was not only an assistant, she was the person who knew which interviews Emma hated, which anniversaries made her silent, which names should never appear on briefing documents unless absolutely necessary. Grace kept Emma's world running with a calm efficiency that often looked like magic and sometimes felt like love, in the language of a schedule's exits and damage control. Emma typed with one thumb, "Safe, needed air. Don't alert anyone, I'll return soon." The reply came almost immediately. "Soon is not a plan." Emma almost smiled. Another message followed. "Are you hurt?" She looked at the cup in her hand, the medicine on the counter. The man now explaining dosage instructions to the elderly customer with patient warmth. "No," she typed, "just wet." Grace's answer took longer this time. "That is not funny." But after a moment, another bubble appeared. "Send location." Emma hesitated. Daniel glanced toward her, not prying, simply aware. She put the phone away. When the old man left, Daniel took off his white coat, folded it over a chair, and nodded toward the front door. "The rain has eased. There's a bench under the awning if you want air that doesn't smell like antiseptic." "I don't mind antiseptic. You say that like someone trying not to admit she minds many things." Emma looked at him. He seemed to realize he had stepped too close to something private. Sorry, occupational habit. People come here pretending they're fine all day. And you believe them. Almost never. The bench outside was narrow and cold, tucked beneath the pharmacy awning. The street had settled into that hour when the city did not sleep but lowered its voice. Delivery scooters hissed through puddles. A noodle shop across the road stacked plastic stools. Somewhere, a child laughed from an upstairs window. Daniel brought the tea with him and sat at the other end of the bench, leaving careful space between them. That space, oddly, made Emma less afraid. "You're kind to strangers," she said. He shrugged. "Strangers are just people before you know their names." A dangerous ache rose in her throat. "My name is Emma," she said after a pause. "Only, Emma," he accepted it as if it were enough. "Daniel, I know. It's on the sign." He glanced back at the pharmacy sign where Hart Family Pharmacy glowed in tired blue letters. "Then we're both very mysterious." She smiled, and this time it did not feel manufactured for years. Every introduction had carried weight. Emma Vale, founder and CEO. Emma Vale, keynote speaker. Youngest woman on the global billionaires list. Strategic donor, ruthless negotiator, impossible woman. People heard her name and adjusted themselves around it. Their voices became smoother, their eyes measured. Their kindness became careful, calculated, or afraid. Daniel heard Emma and offered her tea in a paper cup. It should have meant nothing. It meant too much. Her phone rang again, this time not with the discreet vibration of a message, but a call that seemed to slice through the night. Grace. Emma stood too quickly. "I should go." Daniel stood as well, but did not move to stop her. "Do you have a ride?" Yes, a lie. Her driver was likely circling 3 districts away under Grace's increasingly furious orders. Daniel glanced at the empty curb. Emma lifted her chin, the old armor returning by instinct. "I can manage. I believe you can." His reply was gentle. "That doesn't mean you have to do everything the hard way." The words followed her into silence. For a moment she almost told him. Not everything. Not Emily Rose. Not Celia Whitmore. Not the theft accusation that had ruined a girl's life while adults looked away. But perhaps one small thing. That she was not merely passing through. That this neighborhood had once been a map of survival. That she remembered him. Instead, she said, "Thank you for the tea. And the unfriendly medicine. And the unfriendly medicine." His smile softened. "Take care, Emma." She walked away before he could see what his ordinary farewell did to her. 2 blocks later, Grace's black sedan pulled up beside the curb with the precision of a rescue operation. Grace stepped out under an umbrella, hair immaculate despite the rain, eyes bright with restrained panic. "Get in," she said. Emma did. For the first minute, neither woman spoke. The car moved through wet streets, leaving Hart Family Pharmacy behind like a small lit room in another life. Then Grace turned toward her. "Do you have any idea what could happen if someone photographed you there?" Emma leaned back, suddenly exhausted. "No one recognized me. Recognition is not required for speculation. It only requires a lens and malice." Emma looked out at the blurred city. "I wanted 1 hour where nobody measured me." Grace's anger faltered. In the dim car, under the passing light of street lamps, Emma's face looked younger than it had in months. Not peaceful exactly, but unguarded in a way Grace rarely saw. "Did you get it?" Grace asked quietly. Emma thought of Daniel's hand placing medicine beside tea, his voice saying that strangers were just people before names, the way he looked at her scar without turning it into a weapon. "For a little while," she said. The next morning Emma told herself she returned because gratitude required proper manners. It was a poor excuse. She knew it as she stood in front of her mirror choosing plain trousers, a soft grey sweater, and a coat without a designer logo. She tied her hair low, applied almost no makeup, and dismissed the security detail with a firmness that made Grace press her lips together until they nearly disappeared. "This is reckless," Grace said. "It's a pharmacy, not a battlefield." In your life, the difference is often unclear. Emma almost changed her mind. Then she remembered the bench, the paper cup, the rare lightness of being only Emma. "I'll be careful," she said. Grace studied her for a long moment. "That is what you say when you are about to be emotional instead of careful." Emma did not deny it. Hart Family Pharmacy looked different by daylight. Smaller, perhaps. More ordinary. A row of potted herbs sat near the entrance, their leaves washed clean by last night's rain. A mother pushed a stroller past the door. An old bicycle leaned against the wall, locked with a chain that had seen better years. Daniel was restocking shelves when she entered. He looked up, surprised, then pleased in a way he did not try to hide. "Consultant passing through," he said. "Your route is very circular." Emma held up a small paper bag from a nearby bakery. "I came to thank you. With carbohydrates. They're the most sincere form of gratitude." He laughed softly, and the sound settled somewhere in her chest. They shared the pastries behind the counter during a quiet half hour. Daniel made tea again. Emma told him harmless things. That she traveled too much, slept too little, disliked hotel pillows, and believed rainy cities were more honest than sunny ones. Daniel told her about Mrs. Alvarez, who refused to take her blood pressure medicine unless he scolded her, about his younger sister moving to another city, about keeping the pharmacy open after his father died, because the neighborhood needed a place that still remembered people by name. The conversation remained simple. That was why it disarmed her. He did not ask about her salary, her connections, her last name. He did not try to impress her. When a customer entered, he excused himself with the same kindness he gave Emma, neither elevating nor diminishing anyone. And slowly, dangerously, Emma began to enjoy it. Being seen without being measured, being heard without being evaluated, being offered warmth that had no invoice hidden underneath. When she left, Daniel walked her to the door. "Will your work bring you through again?" he asked. Emma paused with her hand on the glass. The honest answer rose first. "I hope so instead," she said. "Maybe," Daniel nodded. But something in his eyes suggested. He understood that maybe often meant, "Please don't ask me to promise what I'm afraid to want." Outside, the late morning sun slipped between buildings, touching the poor district with a tenderness no luxury avenue had ever managed. Emma stepped onto the sidewalk and, for one foolish moment, felt almost free. Across the street, behind the dark window of a parked delivery van, a phone camera lowered. By evening, the photo had already begun to travel. It was blurry, rain-streaked, taken at an unflattering angle. Emma's face was half-turned, her hair loose, her coat plain. Daniel was only a shadow beyond the pharmacy door. But the internet did not need clarity, it only needed hunger. At 7:43 p.m., a gossip account with millions of followers posted the image. The caption read, "Billionaire heiress secretly meets unknown man in poor district." By 8 o'clock that evening, Emma Vale's name had become a room full of strangers. It moved from phone to phone, slipped under office doors, flashed across elevator screens, and entered dinner conversations where people who had never met her spoke with the confidence of judges. A woman who had built hospitals, acquired failing companies, and funded scholarships for children whose names she remembered personally was suddenly reduced to a blurred figure outside a small pharmacy in a district, most of them only mentioned when discussing property risk. Grace Lynn found Emma in the private conference room on the 46th floor, standing before the glass wall with the city burning gold beneath her. Emma was still in the plain coat from that morning. It looked wrong in the room. Too soft, too human, like evidence left at a crime scene. Grace closed the door quietly. "It's spreading." Emma did not turn around. How bad? The first post was gossip. Now finance media is picking it up because of the acquisition vote. They're calling it an undisclosed personal connection in an unstable district. Emma smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. An unstable district. That's one way to describe a place where people buy medicine and bread. Grace hesitated. She had worked for Emma long enough to recognize the exact stillness in her shoulders. It was not calm. It was control applied over pain with surgical precision. "The board wants an emergency call at 9, Grace said. "Victor Hale is already on the line with legal. And Richard Whitmore's office has requested a statement." At the name Whitmore, something old passed through Emma's eyes. It appeared and vanished so quickly that anyone else might have missed it. Grace did not. "Of course he has," Emma said. Her reflection in the glass looked composed, expensive, untouchable, a woman carved from discipline. But behind that reflection, another girl stood, thin, uniform, worn shoes, rain-soaked hair, clutching a second-hand bag while teachers whispered theft and scholarship donors turned away their faces. Emily rose. The name did not belong in this room. Emma had made sure of that. She had buried it under degrees, companies, interviews, philanthropy, and the careful invention of a woman no one could pity. Yet, one blurry photograph had pulled a loose thread, and somewhere at the other end of that thread was Daniel Hart, who had given a shivering girl warm tea years ago, without asking whether she deserved kindness. "He doesn't know," Emma said. Almost to herself, Grace watched her. "The pharmacist." Emma turned then, and the sharpness returned to her expression. "He has nothing to do with this. That won't matter to them." It was cruel because it was true. At 9, Emma sat at the head of a long black table, while the faces of her directors filled the screen. They appeared in rectangles of polished concern, each framed by bookcases, leather chairs, or art chosen to imply generational taste. Victor Hale occupied the central square, silver-haired, dignified, with the gentle disappointment of a man who had turned judgment into a form of mentorship. "Emma," Victor began, "we're not questioning your private life. People often said that just before doing exactly that. We are questioning optics," added a director from London. "The Whitmore acquisition is delicate. Their family has influence over half the old institutional investors involved. Any perception of instability. Visiting a pharmacy is instability," Emma asked. "It depends on the neighborhood," another said before he could stop himself. The room became silent. Emma looked at him through the camera. "Does illness behave better in wealthy neighborhoods?" Victor folded his hands. "No one is attacking the district, but association has consequences. You are not merely a private citizen. You are the face of Vale Global. A face appearing in a poor quarter, outside an unknown man's shop, without security or explanation, invites speculation." There it was. Not danger, not concern, contamination. Emma felt the familiar cold rise under her ribs. Once, when she had been Emily, a woman from the scholarship committee had looked at her sleeves and said, "We must be careful who we allow into these programs. Poverty teaches certain habits." No one had said she was dirty. They had not needed to. "Then issue a statement," Emma said. "I visited a local pharmacy as part of preliminary charitable research." Grace, standing by the wall, lowered her eyes. She knew the lie cost Emma something. Not because Emma disliked lying. Business had taught her that silence and phrasing were cousins. But because it made Daniel into a project instead of a person. Victor's expression softened in that paternal way Emma had once trusted. "Good, keep it impersonal. And until the Whitmore deal is secured, avoid unnecessary contact." "Unnecessary," Emma repeated. Victor's tone cooled. "Richard Whitmore is already implying that your judgment is compromised. We cannot hand him material." As if summoned by his name, Richard's message arrived in Grace's tablet 10 minutes after the call ended. Grace read it and looked up. He gave a quote. Emma took the tablet. "Richard Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore Group and principal stakeholder in the pending acquisition, expressed concern over Ms. Vale's recent conduct. Leadership requires discernment," Whitmore stated. "When personal entanglements intersect with corporate responsibility, shareholders deserve transparency." Emma placed the tablet on the table. A younger woman might have thrown it. Emily Rose might have cried in a bathroom until her throat hurt. Vale only stood. She said. Grace nodded. And Daniel Hart. Emma closed her eyes briefly at the sound of his name spoken inside the machinery of her life. Protect him, she said quietly. Send security if needed. Compensation for business disruption, whatever he requires, from you. Emma's answer came too quickly. Anonymous. Grace did not move. Emma looked at her. What? You're trying to protect him without letting him know from what? That is the safest way. For whom? Emma's gaze hardened, but Grace had never been afraid of her. After a moment, Emma looked away. For him. In the neighborhood where Daniel Hart had always measured time by prescriptions, school coughs, winter flu, and old Mrs. Alvarez's blood pressure refills, the next morning arrived like an invasion. There were reporters outside before he unlocked the front door. At first, he thought there had been an accident nearby. 3 cameras, 2 young women with microphones, a man in a padded vest speaking into his phone. Then one of them saw him and called his name. Mr. Hart, how long have you known Emma Vale? Daniel stopped with the key in the lock. The name meant nothing to him beyond the vague recognition everyone had of powerful people on magazine covers in waiting rooms. Emma Vale, billionaire, tech investor, charity gala presence, woman whose suits cost more than his monthly rent. Her name existed in a different weather system. I'm sorry, he said. Are you in a relationship with her? Did she buy your pharmacy? Were you paid to meet her? The questions struck him out of order, absurd and sharp. Behind the reporters, a delivery driver slowed to watch. A schoolboy lifted his phone. Daniel felt heat rise up the back of his neck, not from guilt, but from the sudden experience of becoming public property. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. This is a pharmacy. If you need medication, you're welcome to come in one at a time. If not, please don't block the entrance. His voice remained even. Years behind a counter had taught him patience. People shouted when frightened, cried when embarrassed, blamed him when insurance failed, asked for miracles in bottles. He had learned not to return panic with panic. But nothing in his quiet life had prepared him for strangers, accusing him of knowing a woman he only knew as Emma, the tired lady in a plain coat who had looked at his shelves as if memory lived between the cough syrup and bandages. By noon, the pharmacy had become a stage. Some customers entered just to stare. One woman pretended to browse vitamins while filming him from chest height. A man in a tailored coat bought a pack of gum and said loudly, "Must be nice, landing a billionaire. Going to renovate this dump." Daniel placed the receipt on the counter. "Have a good day," the man smirked. "That's it? No comment?" "This is not a theater, no, but apparently it's a dating service." An elderly customer snapped at him before Daniel could answer. "Young man, if your mother raised you badly, don't advertise it in a pharmacy." The man left under a wave of mutters. Daniel smiled at the elderly woman. "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez." She leaned closer. "Is it true?" He paused. Her tone was not cruel. Only curious, protective perhaps. "I don't know what is true anymore," he said honestly. By afternoon, the phone rang so constantly he unplugged it for 10 minutes just to hear himself think. Prescription orders were delayed. A mother with a feverish child had to push past a blogger demanding to know whether Daniel had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Someone online posted that his pharmacy had received suspicious funding. Someone else claimed he was an opportunist from a poor neighborhood seducing a lonely rich woman. The cruelty came dressed as jokes, but Daniel recognized its shape. People loved a ladder until someone from below tried to climb it. At 4 o'clock, Grace Lynn walked into the pharmacy. Daniel knew immediately she did not belong there, though not because she looked down on the place. It was the opposite. She observed everything carefully. The worn mat, the cracked corner near the refrigerator, the handwritten sign offering free blood pressure checks on Fridays. Her grey coat was simple, but expensive in the quiet way wealth often preferred when it did not need applause. "Mr. Hart?" she asked. "Yes, my name is Grace Lynn. I represent someone who would like to assist you with the disruption caused today." Daniel's expression changed by the smallest degree. Represent someone. Grace placed a card on the counter but kept her fingers on it, as if she knew he might push it back. "We can arrange private security for the next few days. We can also compensate your pharmacy for lost revenue, damaged reputation, and any additional staff you may need." Daniel looked at her, then at the card. "Who sent you?" Grace held his gaze. "A concerned party." He gave a short, quiet laugh. It had no amusement in it. "A concerned party," he repeated. "Is that what I am now? A problem to be handled? That isn't how it was intended, but it is how it arrived." Grace softened. "Mr. Hart, the attention may get worse. You didn't ask for this." "No, I didn't." His voice remained polite, which somehow made the anger beneath it clearer. "And I also didn't ask to be paid into silence by someone who won't give me their name. It isn't payment for silence." "What is it then?" Grace had answers prepared. Practical ones, legal ones, compassionate ones. But Daniel's dignity stood between them, plain and unarmored, and she understood suddenly why Emma had looked shaken when speaking of him. "It's protection," Grace said. Daniel looked toward the front window, where a young man pretended not to film them. "When I was younger," he said slowly, "someone told me poor people should be grateful for help, even when it comes like a slap. I decided then that if I ever helped anyone, I'd do it face to face." Grace felt the sentence land somewhere deeper than business. Daniel slid the card back across the counter. "Tell your concerned party I appreciate the thought, but I won't take anonymous money." "She didn't mean to insult you," Grace said before she could stop herself. Daniel stilled "she." The word hung in the air between shelves of pain relievers and children's vitamins. Grace saw the realization begin, not full knowledge yet, only direction. She took back the card, regret tightening her mouth. "I'll leave my number anyway," she said, writing it on the back of a receipt. "Not for money. If the reporters block patients from entering, call me." Daniel did not touch the receipt until after she left. Outside, dusk settled over the district, making the pharmacy windows glow warm against the street. The reporters thinned but did not disappear. Daniel locked the door later than usual, after filling the last prescription for a night shift cleaner, who apologized 3 times for making him stay. When he was finally alone, the silence felt unfamiliar. He made tea in the back room, the same cheap black tea he had offered Emma. The memory returned with unreasonable clarity, her fingers around the paper cup. The way she had said some kindnesses stayed, the flicker in her face when he mentioned Emily Rose without knowing he had touched a hidden bruise. Emma. Not Emma Vale, just Emma. A woman with sad eyes and a careful smile. A woman someone powerful wanted to protect without being named. On his way home, Daniel stopped at the corner newsstand because the old owner waved him over. "You're famous now," the man said, half teasing, half worried. "Please don't say that, then don't look left." Of course, Daniel looked on the magazine rack. Beneath a plastic cover reflecting streetlights, a business magazine displayed a woman in a white suit standing before a skyline. Her hair was swept back. Her eyes were calm, commanding, almost cold in the way photographers loved to make powerful women appear. The headline read, "Emma Vale, the billionaire rewriting the rules of power." Daniel reached for the magazine slowly. The face on the cover was polished into myth, but he saw past the lighting, past the diamonds at her ears, past the untouchable posture. He saw the woman who had sat in his pharmacy holding warm tea as though it had once saved her life. For a long moment, the noise of the street faded. Daniel understood then why the reporters had come, why Grace had spoken in careful lines, why Emma had paused at his door as if leaving cost her more than goodbye. The woman everyone was talking about. The billionaire, the scandal, the headline. was the same woman who had looked at him with the frightened recognition of a past neither of them had yet dared to name. Daniel did not buy the magazine. He stood there in the convenience store until the cashier glanced at him twice. Until the old man behind him cleared his throat with the small impatience of someone waiting to pay for cigarettes. Until the glossy cover seemed to grow, heavier in his hands than paper had any right to be. Emma Vale, not Emma who drank tea in the back room of his pharmacy. Not Emma who wore a plain coat and smiled as if she had forgotten how to use the expression properly. Not the woman who had looked at him with an old ache in her eyes and asked him if he always helped strangers. A billionaire, a public figure, a woman whose name appeared in financial columns, charity galas, political rumors, and now scandal. Daniel placed the magazine back on the rack carefully, as though sudden movement might break something inside him. He paid for the milk he had come in to buy, forgot to take it, and had to return when the cashier called after him. Outside, rain had started to fall in thin silver lines. He stood under the awning and looked at the street, at taxis blurring past, at pedestrians lifting briefcases over their heads, at his own reflection in the glass door. Ordinary coat, tired eyes, a pharmacist from a neighborhood where people still asked if medicine could be split because payday was next week. He was not angry because she was rich. That would have been too simple, almost comfortable. Wealth had never offended him by itself. He had filled prescriptions for wealthy men with trembling hands and poor women who counted coins with quiet dignity. Pain did not check bank accounts before entering a body, no. What tightened in his chest was not envy. It was the memory of her sitting across from him, letting him offer kindness as if they were two ordinary people meeting in an ordinary hour, and all the while she had known he did not know. By the time he reached his pharmacy, the rain had deepened. The blue sign above the door flickered once, before settling into its steady glow. Inside, the familiar smell of antiseptic, paper bags and lavender hand cream wrapped around him. Mrs. Alvarez was waiting near the counter to ask about her husband's blood pressure medication. A student came in with a cough. A delivery man needed a signature. Life, inconveniently tender and relentless, continued. Daniel worked. He measured, explained, smiled, listened. He told Mrs. Alvarez to make sure her husband took the tablet after breakfast. He asked the student whether she had a fever. He signed for 3 boxes of antibiotics and placed them in the back. Only when the last customer left and the rain tapped harder against the windows did he allow himself to look at the business card. Grace had left earlier, not Emma's number. Grace Lynn's, professional, controlled, protected by layers. Daniel called anyway. Grace answered on the second ring, Mr. Hart. The fact that she already knew his number should have surprised him. It didn't. I need to see her, Daniel said. There was a brief silence, not refusal, but calculation. Vale has a full evening. I'm sure she does. His voice came out quieter than he expected, and perhaps them out quieter than made Grace stop. After a moment, she said, I'll ask no, Daniel said, looking at the rain sliding down the glass. Please don't ask like it's business. Tell her Daniel wants to know which parts were real. Grace did not answer immediately. Then softer, I'll tell her. Emma arrived 40 minutes later, not in a limousine, though one might have waited nearby. Not with cameras, not with a security team entering first. She came through the pharmacy door in a dark coat, her hair pulled low at the nape of her neck, rain shining on her shoulders. For one fragile second, Daniel saw the woman from the back room again. Then he saw the hesitation in her eyes. It was not guilt alone, it was fear. Daniel, she said. The bell above the door trembled faintly behind her. He had imagined this moment during those 40 minutes. In some versions, he shouted. In others, he walked away before she could speak. But when she stood there, pale beneath the warm lights of his small pharmacy, anger seemed like an instrument too blunt for what had been wounded. You're Emma Val, he said. She swallowed. Yes, the Emma veil moved across her face, yes. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a prescription, as if names and dosages could still make sense of the world. And you let me talk to you like you were someone who needed nothing from anyone. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. It was a beautiful bag, understated and expensive in a way that did not need logos. Daniel noticed it now. He wished he didn't. I didn't plan it, she said. That first day, I came in because I was being followed by reporters. I needed somewhere quiet. You were kind and You stayed. Emma stopped. Daniel looked at her then, really looked, past the perfect coat, past the composure she wore like armor. You came back. Her eyes glistened though no tears fell. Yes, why? The question was simple. That made it crueler. Emma turned her face slightly toward the shelves, toward cold medicine and vitamins, and the little stand of children's bandages printed with cartoon animals. Her voice, when it came, was low. Because here nobody asked me what my stock price was. Nobody watched how I held a glass to decide whether I was nervous. Nobody wanted a statement. She gave a small, painful smile. For 1 hour I didn't have to be Emma Vale. Daniel absorbed that. He wanted to understand. Part of him did understand. There was a loneliness in her words that money could not disguise. But understanding did not immediately heal. So you let me believe you were just Emma. I am just Emma, she said. And there was sudden urgency in it. No, his voice sharpened, not loud, but enough to make her flinch. You were Emma Vale to the world. You were Emma to me because I didn't know better. She lowered her eyes. He hated that he noticed the movement, hated that it reminded him of someone else years ago. A thin girl in a school uniform, too worn at the cuffs, standing outside a clinic with her pride, held together by thread. The memory came quickly, like lightning behind cloud. Emily. He had not spoken the name aloud in years. Sometimes he wondered if he had imagined her more clearly than he had known her. A scholarship student, quiet, bruised by the invisible hands of people who knew how to humiliate without leaving marks. He had helped her once, twice perhaps, with medicine she couldn't afford, with bread from the bakery next door, with the kind of attention young men gave without naming it because they were too poor to promise anything. Then she had vanished. Daniel's gaze returned to Emma's face, and the strange ache of recognition moved again beneath his ribs. Was any of it real? He asked. Emma looked up. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Her lips parted. No answer came. Daniel stepped out from behind the counter. The space between them felt small and impossible. I don't care that you're wealthy. I care that you stood here and let me offer you honest kindness while you kept your whole life hidden. Emma's expression tightened, like someone bracing for a blow she believed she deserved. I know, she whispered. Do you? He searched her face. Or did you think I'd treat you differently if I knew? I knew you would. Maybe. But you didn't give me the chance. She closed her eyes briefly. The rain beat harder against the windows. A car passed outside, sending a wave through the gutter. In the small silence that followed, Daniel asked the question that had been forming like something dark at the edge of his mind. Were you ashamed? Emma went still. He regretted it almost as soon as he said it, but pain rarely waited for kindness to approve its language. He continued, softer now, more wounded than accusing. Not of being rich, of being seen here. With me, with someone from a street like this. Someone who knew you before all those headlines maybe. Someone ordinary. Color drained from her face. No, she said. But the word broke. Daniel saw it. The break. The place where denial touched something much older than him. And Emma was no longer standing in his pharmacy. She was 16 again. Wearing a second-hand blazer that smelled faintly of rain because the apartment ceiling leaked in winter. She was walking through the iron gates of Westbridge Academy, with her scholarship letter folded in the pocket closest to her heart, believing that if she studied hard enough, bowed her head low enough, became useful enough, The world might allow her to pass. It had not. The girls in cashmere sweaters had smiled at her shoes, not laughed. That would have been easier to condemn. They had smiled politely, their eyes lowering just enough. One of them, Celia Whitmore, had once wrinkled her nose and asked, "Do they not have dry cleaners where you live?" Emily had gone home that day and washed her uniform by hand until her fingers reddened. Her mother had found her in the bathroom. "Clothes are not dignity, my little Rose," her mother had said, kneeling beside the tub, though coughing made her chest rattle. Remember that. But dignity did not stop classmates from moving their bags when Emily sat down. It did not stop teachers from praising her essays with surprise, as if poverty made intelligence an unexpected trick. It did not stop invitations from disappearing. It did not stop whispers when she received top marks. And it had not saved her mother. The clinic wanted payment before further tests. The hospital said there were forms, waiting lists, options. Emily learned that options were often a beautiful word for doors that would not open unless money knocked first. Her mother died on a Thursday morning while rain tapped the window of their one-bedroom apartment. Emily had held her hand and felt warmth leave the world. After the funeral, she returned to school because scholarships required attendance and grief did not excuse poverty. Celia had looked at her black ribbon and said, almost kindly, "You must be relieved not to have medical bills now." That night, Emily vomited behind the gym and made a promise so fierce it frightened even herself. One day, no one would look down on her again. Not for her coat, not for her address, not for the mother she could not save, not for needing help, never again. Then came the accusation. A diamond bracelet missing from Celia's locker. A search. A teacher's disappointed gaze. The bracelet found in Emily's bag, though she had never touched it. The word theft traveling faster than truth. The scholarship committee's closed faces. The recommendation withdrawn. The expulsion record, stamped and filed. Emily Rose disappeared because no one in that world had needed proof to destroy her. Emma Vale was born years later from work, hunger, rage, discipline, and a refusal to die small. But standing in Daniel's pharmacy, she realized that the old vow had become a prison with golden walls. Daniel's question still hung between them. "Were you ashamed?" Emma opened her mouth. But if she answered no, it would not be the whole truth. If she answered yes, she would wound him with a shame that had never belonged to him. She had not been ashamed of Daniel. She had been ashamed of needing anyone. Ashamed of the girl who once counted coins for medicine. Ashamed of the girl who cried silently in stairwells. Ashamed that Daniel's kindness had reached the part of her she had spent years trying to bury. But how could she explain that without admitting the name Emily Rose? How could she tell him that he had not met her recently? Not really, that once, long before Emma Vale became a headline, he had been one of the few people who looked at her without contempt. "I can't do this," she said, voice barely steady. Daniel's eyes changed. Emma, the name sounded like a hand reaching for her that made it worse. She took a step back. "I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked. "Or for being found out." She flinched as if he had touched a bruise for a moment. He looked as though he wanted to take the words back, but they were already in the room with them, sharp and breathing. Emma turned toward the door. Daniel did not stop her. Perhaps that hurt most. She left with the same quietness with which she had entered, the bell trembling above her head, the rain swallowing her shape beyond the glass. Daniel stood in the pharmacy after she was gone, listening to the little refrigerator hum behind the counter. The sound suddenly too ordinary for the damage that had been done. On the counter, she had left a drop of rainwater. It slid slowly across the polished surface before breaking apart. Daniel wiped it away with his thumb. By evening, the rain had stopped, but the streets still shone dark under the lamps. Daniel closed late. He told himself paperwork needed finishing, inventory needed checking, invoices needed sorting. In truth, He did not want to go upstairs to his small apartment where silence would ask questions more directly than customers did. At 9:15, the bell rang. Daniel looked up, expecting perhaps Grace, perhaps Emma again, perhaps no one he was ready to face. The man who entered wore a charcoal overcoat, and the kind of ease that came from never wondering whether he belonged anywhere. His hair was perfectly styled, his expression pleasant in the way expensive knives were polished. "Mr. Hart?" he asked. Daniel straightened. "We're closed. I won't take much of your time." The man smiled. Richard Whitmore. The name meant something even before Daniel placed it. Whitmore belonged to buildings, donor plaques, old families whose portraits hung in private schools and hospitals. Recently, it also belonged near Emma's name, in articles about board tensions and hostile acquisitions. Daniel's shoulders tightened. "If this is about Ms. Vale, I have nothing to say." Richard gave a soft laugh. "That, I suspect, is precisely why you matter. I said we're closed, of course." Richard glanced around the pharmacy, not rudely, which somehow made it worse. His eyes passed over the shelves, the worn floor, the community notice board covered with babysitting flyers and lost cat posters. A respectable place, honest, useful. "I can see why she would come here." Daniel said nothing. Richard's gaze returned to him. "Emma has always had an eye for useful places." The words were mild. Poison often was. Daniel moved behind the counter, kneading the barrier. "You should leave." "I will." Richard reached into his coat. "But I thought you deserved context. People like Emma are very skilled at becoming whatever the room requires. Vulnerable if vulnerability opens a door, generous if generosity buys loyalty, silent if silence keeps the past buried." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't know what she is to me." "No," Richard said softly. That landed. Daniel hated that it did. Richard placed a thin folder on the counter, not placed, with care, as though offering Daniel did not touch it. "What is that?" "Public record, though inconveniently difficult to find now. Westbridge Academy, years ago." Richard's voice lowered, intimate and regretful. "Before Emma Vale existed." The air in the pharmacy seemed to thin. Daniel looked at the folder. He should have ordered Richard out. He should have refused to participate in whatever game old money was playing against a woman who had clearly frightened it. But Emma's silence from earlier stood beside him. Her face, when he asked if she was ashamed. The way she had run from a question instead of answering it. Richard opened the folder himself. Inside was a photocopied school document, stamped, dated, official in the cold language institutions used when they wanted cruelty to look like procedure. Daniel's eyes moved down the page. Student name, Emily Rose. Status, scholarship student. Disciplinary action, expulsion. Reason, theft of personal property. For a moment, Daniel could not breathe. Emily Rose. Not a memory, not a ghost he had softened with time. A name, a record, a wound preserved in ink. Richard watched him with calm satisfaction as Daniel stared at the page that connected the billionaire on the magazine cover to the poor girl who had vanished years ago. And beneath the shock, sharper than betrayal, came the terrible possibility that Emma had not merely hidden her fortune. She had erased Emily. The room seemed to shrink around Daniel as he stared at the school record, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The words were so ordinary, so official, and yet they carried the force of a sentence that had once destroyed a life. Emily Rose, scholarship student, expulsion, theft. He had known fragments before, a rumor in the hallways, a sudden silence where a girl used to be. The way the other students had spoken about her, with that casual cruelty reserved for people who were too poor to defend themselves. Back then, Daniel had been only a teenager with enough courage to bring her a sandwich from the cafeteria when everyone else pretended not to notice her hunger. He remembered her shock more than her gratitude, her nervous smile more than her pain. He had seen her crying once behind the library and had turned away afterward, helpless and embarrassed by his own kindness, as if kindness itself were an awkward thing. But this was not rumor, this was a record. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Richard's smile was thin. "Why does that matter? It exists." Daniel looked up. "You know it exists because you brought it. I'm simply making sure you understand the kind of woman you've been idealizing." Richard folded his arms, his cuff links catching the light. The internet is already doing the rest. He was right. Daniel's phone had been vibrating on the desk for the last 10 minutes, each buzz a fresh injury. He had not wanted to look, but now, because the room itself felt poisoned, he reached for it. The headlines were there in ruthless, gleaming rows. Billionaire Emma Vale linked to past theft scandal. Former scholarship student expelled for stealing from classmate. Was Emma Vale ever really who she claimed to be? There were screenshots of the school record, old photographs from a student yearbook, grainy images of a girl in an oversized uniform, standing at the edge of a group that had already decided she did not belong. Someone had dug into the past and laid it on the internet like a body on a table. And beneath the headlines, the comments were even colder than the articles. Fraud, gold digger, rebranded thief. She probably stole her way to the top too. Daniel felt something in his chest tighten so hard. It bordered on pain. He imagined Emma, seeing these words and having no one in the room who could stop them from reaching her. Richard watched him with the calm of a man who knew exactly where to press. "Now you understand why people like us prefer clean histories." Daniel lowered the phone. "You did this." Richard did not deny it. "I exposed what was already public record." Public record doesn't mean truth. Truth? Richard gave a small, almost amused sigh. Truth is a luxury for people who can afford it. Daniel's jaw hardened. He wanted to strike that polished smile off Richard's face, but anger would only feed the spectacle. Richard had not come for a fight. He had come to make Daniel feel contaminated by proximity, to make him doubt the woman he had started to care about, to make him step back. Instead, Daniel put the folder down with deliberate care. "If you wanted to destroy her," he said, "you should have remembered that she survives worse than men like you." Richard's eyes sharpened at that, but Daniel was already walking out. The city outside was bright and indifferent, sunlight glancing off glass towers, traffic moving as if no one's life had just split open. Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing hard before he called Emma. It rang several times before Grace answered. "She's in a meeting," Grace said too quickly. Daniel looked up at the mirrored face of the building. "Tell her I need to see her." A pause, then Grace more gently. "Daniel, now may not be a good time, I know." He did know. He knew enough to understand that the worst wounds were the ones people expected you to dress in public. "I'll wait," he said. But Grace did not answer, because even through the phone she could hear what he had not said. Not for a convenient time, not for a careful conversation, but because this mattered now more than comfort did. When Emma finally emerged from the meeting room, she looked exactly as the world had trained her to look. Immaculate, controlled, and faintly distant, as if her body belonged to a woman who did not bruise. But Daniel saw the difference immediately. Her face was too still. "Grace said you were here," she said. He nodded once. They posted the record. Her eyes flickered only for a second, but it was enough. "Emma, I know." That was all she said, and the flatness of her voice frightened him more than tears would have. She did not ask what the comments said. She did not ask how bad it was. She had already imagined every version of humiliation herself. "Come with me," he said. She gave him a faint, bitter smile. Anywhere people can't reach you. I own half the buildings in this city, Daniel, and still they're reaching you." For the first time, something in her expression cracked. Not enough to become vulnerability, just enough to show the effort it took to hold herself upright. She looked away. "At the board meeting," she said softly, "they want a statement, something cold, precise denial. legal wording, a promise to pursue defamation. They said the company cannot afford emotional ambiguity. Daniel watched her carefully. What do you want to do? For a moment she seemed almost stunned by the question, as if no one had asked her what she wanted in a very long time. Then she looked at him, and the answer was visible in the tiredness around her mouth. I don't know, it was the most dangerous thing she had ever said to him, because it sounded like surrender. He took her hand before she could pull away. Then don't decide tonight. Her fingers were cold. You think delaying will help? No, I think breathing might. Something in her gaze softened, painful and reluctant. You always say things that sound simple. Because simple things are often the hardest. She almost laughed, but it vanished quickly. Around them, the hallway moved with the quiet efficiency of assistants, executives, and polished shoes passing over expensive floors. No one stopped. No one noticed that the woman they admired on television was standing still as stone while the past climbed over her. Emma withdrew her hand. I have to go back. To what? To the meeting, to the statement, to pretending I'm unaffected. Daniel wanted to tell her she didn't have to pretend with him, but he understood her too well by now to force that truth too soon. So instead he said, I'm going to check something. Her brows drew together slightly. Check what? The school archive. That finally made her look directly at him. The guardedness in her eyes returned at once, but beneath it he saw fear, old and immediate, like an injured animal hearing footsteps in the dark. Daniel, she said, don't. It was not a request. It was a warning from a place she had not meant to expose. He lowered his voice. If the past is being used against you, I need to know what really happened. Her lips parted, then closed again. For a second he thought she might tell him to stop, to leave, to let the damage remain buried because buried things sometimes felt less sharp. Instead she said, almost inaudibly, some things are better left dead, not if they were buried alive. The words landed between them with quiet force. Emma's throat moved, but she said nothing. After a moment she turned away. Be careful, she said. It was not permission, it was trust, and that trust felt heavier than any request. The old school was almost unchanged. The archive room sat at the end of a narrow corridor, behind a door that still smelled faintly of dust and floor polish. Daniel had to speak to a clerk, who looked at him with mild suspicion, then sign a form, then wait while the woman disappeared into the back with a key ring. All of it felt absurdly small compared to the scale of the scandal outside. But maybe that was how truth often survived. Not in grand confrontations, but in drawers, ledgers, and forgotten filing cabinets. When he was finally allowed inside, the room was cool and dim. Rows of boxes sat on metal shelves. Graduation files, disciplinary records, student organization logs, trophy catalogs, the ordinary machinery of a place that claimed to shape futures. Daniel found the year, then the class, then the incident report. His pulse quickened as he read. There had been a necklace reported missing during a charity event hosted by the school's wealthy donor families. A sapphire pendant, apparently valuable, belonging to a student named Celia Whitmore. The name hit him like a cold draft. The report was brief, almost careless. Emily Rose had been seen near the changing room. Her locker had been searched. The necklace was later recovered in a janitorial cart. No witness statement was attached, no camera footage, only the conclusion. Student theft, immediate expulsion recommended. Daniel frowned. The language was too neat, too complete. It had the feeling of a story written after the fact, by people who wanted an ending more than they wanted accuracy. He turned the pages more quickly now. A note from the dean, a signature from the disciplinary committee. Another name repeated in correspondence, always with deference. Celia Whitmore, not merely a victim, a donor's daughter, old money protected. Then Daniel saw it, a small appendix document, older than the rest, cross-referenced from a separate archive file. The necklace had not simply been Celia's. It had belonged to her as part of a family set commissioned through an auction house tied to the Whitmore estate. The same Whitmores. His eyes narrowed as he read the attached note from the school administrator. Per request of family representative, avoid public mention of the item's provenance. Family representative. Not a student then. Not a girl who had lost something precious in the chaos of adolescence. A family member with enough reach to control how the story would be told. Daniel sat back slowly, pieces sliding together with sickening precision. Celia Whitmore, Richard Whitmore's cousin, and now, in the present, Celia was not some forgotten girl in an old school file. She was a socialite photographed at gallery openings, charity luncheons, and private acquisition dinners. Her name appeared in the margins of Emma's current business world, close to one of the deal networks tied to the very merger discussions Emma had been navigating for weeks. Daniel stared at the paper in his hand, the old lie suddenly standing upright in the present. The missing necklace had not only belonged to a Whitmore, it had belonged to Celia Whitmore, Richard's cousin. The same woman now smiling beside board members and investors near Emma's acquisition deal. And somewhere in the silence of the archive room, Daniel understood with a clarity that turned his skin cold. This had never been about a schoolgirl stealing jewelry. It had been about power choosing a victim. By the time dawn thinned over the city, the old lie Daniel had found in the archive had already begun moving through the present like a blade under silk. Emma did not sleep that night. She stood before the glass wall of her penthouse office, with a cup of coffee cooling untouched in her hand, watching the first traffic lights blink awake far below. From this height, the city always looked obedient. Streets ran in clean lines. Towers rose in measured confidence. Even the river seemed to know where it should bend. For years, Emma had believed that if she climbed high enough, no one would be able to look down on her again. But that morning, as Grace Lynn placed a folder on the desk behind her, Emma felt 18 again. Not because she had lost money, not because a deal was in danger. Those were battles she understood. It was because, somewhere in a room filled with people who wore politeness like armor, she would be asked to prove that she deserved the life she had built. The investor committee moved the inquiry to 10. Grace said quietly. Richard Whitmore requested to attend as an interested acquisition party. Emma's fingers tightened around the cup. Of course he did. Grace hesitated. There's more. Celia Whitmore will be at the luncheon afterward. She's been telling people she feels terrible that old rumors are being used against you. A small humorless smile touched Emma's lips. How generous of her. Grace looked at her with the frank concern only she dared show. Emma, you don't have to face all of them alone. The old reflex rose immediately, straight back, cool eyes, untouchable voice. I am not alone, I have counsel, numbers, voting commitments, and a company worth more than all their inherited opinions combined. That isn't what I meant. Emma turned then. The first sunlight caught the edge of her face, brightening the perfect makeup that had been applied to hide a sleepless night. Grace had seen Emma walk into hostile boardrooms, televised hearings, collapsed negotiations, and once, a factory floor after an accident had nearly killed 3 workers. Emma never trembled in public, but Grace had also once found her standing barefoot in a dark pantry during a charity gala because a guest laughed at scholarship students. I know, Emma said softer, but it is the only answer I can afford. At 10 o'clock, the conference room on the 42nd floor was full of smooth voices and sharpened intentions. The inquiry was presented as a matter of fiduciary responsibility. No one accused Emma directly. That would have been vulgar. Instead, they used words like public optics, undisclosed personal history, and potential reputational vulnerability. Men and women who had gladly profited from her judgment now sat with solemn expressions, as if her past were a contagious defect discovered too late. Emma listened without interrupting. Across the long table, Richard Whitmore folded his hands with practiced sympathy. He was handsome in the way expensive things were handsome, polished, composed, and faintly lifeless. When his turn came, he leaned forward. Emma, no one questions your accomplishments, but acquisition approvals depend on trust. If there are unresolved issues from your former identity, perhaps the responsible choice is to step back from the deal temporarily. Former identity. The phrase slid across the table and struck something deep. Emma kept her expression calm. My identity has never been part of the acquisition terms. Richard's smile was gentle enough to insult her. Public confidence is never written in the first draft, but it determines whether any contract survives. An older investor cleared his throat. Vale, can you confirm whether you were previously known as Emily Rose? Silence followed, thick and hungry. Emma could feel every eye on her, waiting not simply for an answer, but for a flinch. For the poor girl to appear under the billionaire's skin. For shame to do what scandal had not yet done. She placed both hands lightly on the table. I built Vale Global under the name Emma Vale. I have complied with all disclosure requirements under every jurisdiction in which we operate. My personal history contains hardship, not fraud. If anyone at this table has evidence otherwise, present it. No one did. Not yet. Richard watched her as if he had expected the answer and enjoyed the wound it cost her to give it. After the inquiry ended, no decision was announced. That was worse than a defeat. A defeat had shape. Suspicion had air. It entered everything. The luncheon was held in the atrium below, all white orchids, crystal glasses, and curated concern. Emma moved through it with the grace people praised in magazines, accepting condolences from people who would repeat her every word before evening. Then Celia Whitmore approached. She wore pale blue, delicate pearls, and an expression soft enough for cameras. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman offering comfort. To a rival under pressure. Emma, Celia said, touching her arm lightly. I'm so sorry this is happening. Truly. Old stories can be so cruel. Emma looked at the hand on her sleeve until Celia removed it. How strange, Emma said. I remember old stories being very useful to you. Celia's eyes did not change, but her smile deepened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so it vanished beneath the sound of forks against porcelain. You always did have a dramatic memory, and you always had a convenient one. For a moment the years collapsed. Emma saw a locker room with damp tile floors, a circle of girls in pressed uniforms, a necklace glittering in an adult's palm, Celia crying beautifully, Emily Rose standing there in second-hand shoes, learning that innocence without status was just another word for helplessness. Celia tilted her head. You know, I almost admired you when you disappeared. Poor girls usually make so much noise when they are removed from places they were never meant to enter. Emma's pulse beat once, hard. Celia's voice remained sweet. But look at you now. So successful, so elegant. You should be grateful, really. Rich people let you stand nearby long enough for you to learn how to imitate us. The world narrowed to Celia's smile. Emma had faced men who tried to buy her company. Politicians who tried to threaten her licenses, journalists who tried to turn grief into headlines. None of them had ever made her feel as small as Celia did with one soft sentence. But Emma was no longer the girl who had no one in the room. She leaned in just enough that Celia could hear the steadiness in her breath. You mistook silence for defeat once. Don't make that mistake again. Celia's gaze sharpened. Then, as a photographer turned toward them, Celia's face transformed back into concern. She reached out as if to embrace Emma. Emma stepped away. The camera flashed anyway. By late afternoon, the image was already spreading online. Celia Whitmore offering sympathy. Emma Vale standing cold and distant. Grace cursed under her breath when she saw it. Emma said nothing. Her phone had been silent all day, except for messages from lawyers, board members, and one missed call from Daniel Hart. She stared at his name longer than she wanted to admit. Daniel, who had found something in the old archive. Daniel, who had doubted her. Daniel, who had looked at Emily Rose's ruined school record and not known whether to trust Emma's silence. When the phone rang again, she answered on the fourth ring. "I found someone," Daniel said without preamble. His voice was rough, tired, urgent. "Mr. Lewis. He was a janitor at St. Catherine's when the necklace disappeared. He remembers that day." Emma closed her one dangerous second. Hope touched her. Then pride rose to strangle it. "Why are you telling me?" A pause. "Because he may have seen someone enter the locker room before the necklace was found." Her heart shifted painfully. "Someone?" He wouldn't say much over the phone. He's old, cautious. But he remembered a girl who wasn't supposed to be there. Emma turned away from Grace, walking toward the window where the city had gone silver under evening clouds. "And now you believe me?" Daniel exhaled. "Emma, no. It's a fair question. Did you need a janitor's memory to decide whether I was a thief? That's not what happened. It felt like what happened." The honesty left her before she could stop it. Once spoken, it stood between them, fragile and accusing. Daniel's voice softened. "I know, she hated that gentleness. Anger would have been easier. Anger could be answered. Gentleness asked to be allowed in. I don't need you to fix this," she said. I didn't say me, but you meant it." Emma's throat tightened. Outside, a helicopter crossed between towers, its red light blinking like a warning. Daniel continued, quieter now. "I was never ashamed that you were poor. Never. Do you understand that? The girl I remembered was tired and hungry, and still gave half her bread to a younger student who cried in the pharmacy line because she couldn't afford medicine for her mother." Emma's hand pressed against the cold glass. "I didn't know you saw that. I saw you. That was the whole problem, Emma. I saw you then, and now you look at that girl like she's someone you had to bury." She could not answer. Daniel's voice broke just slightly. "I was hurt because you made needing anyone sound like a weakness. Like if I reached for you, I was insulting everything you survived." The words found a place no accusation had reached all her life after that. Catherine's had been constructed from refusals. She refused pity, refused dependence, refused to ask, to wait, to trust, to be cornered without proof in her hand and power at her back. Independence had saved her. It had fed her, clothed her, built towers from ashes. But somewhere along the way, what saved her had also locked the door from the inside. "I don't know how to be helped," she whispered. On the other end, Daniel was silent long enough for her to hear her own breathing. "Then don't call it help," he said. "Call it standing beside you." Warmth moved through her slowly, frightening in its tenderness. She looked at Grace, who had pretended not to listen and failed completely. Grace's eyes were bright. "When are you meeting him?" Emma asked. "Tomorrow morning. He agreed to talk in person. If he's willing to make a statement, it could change everything." Everything. The word was too large to trust. "Daniel," she said, and his name came out softer than she intended. "Yes? Be careful." A faint warmth entered his voice. "You too." After they hung up, Emma remained by the window for a long time. The city no longer looked obedient. It looked alive with hidden crossings, unseen dangers, windows lit by people who carried stories no one had asked to hear. For the first time in years, she let herself remember Emily Rose, not as a stain, but as a girl who had endured more than anyone had known. Across town, Daniel sat in the back office of Heart Pharmacy with Mr. Lewis's number written on a prescription pad. The old man had sounded frightened, but not confused. His voice had trembled when he said, "Celia," Whitmore's name. He had remembered polished shoes. A blue ribbon, a side door left unlatched. At 8:12 that night, Daniel's phone rang. Mr. Lewis spoke in a hushed voice. "I'll do it. I'll tell what I saw. I should done it years ago." Daniel stood so quickly. His chair scraped the floor. "Thank you. I'll come to you wherever you feel safe." "There's a church on Mason Street," Mr. Lewis said. 9 tomorrow morning. Bring the young lady if she'll come. I will. The line clicked dead. Daniel closed his eyes, relief washing over him so sharply it almost hurt. For the first time, the past had a witness who was not afraid to speak. 20 minutes later, sirens screamed through the wet streets near Mason and 3rd. Daniel did not know why he reached for his phone before it rang. Perhaps some part of him had already learned that old power did not surrender, simply because truth had found a voice. The call came from an unfamiliar number. A paramedic asked if he knew a Mr. Arthur Lewis's. Daniel's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Outside, rain began to fall against the pharmacy windows, blurring the lights of the city into long trembling lines. Mr. Lewis had stepped off the curb on his way home. A dark car had run the red light, and before he could meet Daniel, before he could tell Emma what he had seen, the only man willing to testify lay unconscious on the pavement, his memory trapped behind blood, glass, and the silence of old power. By morning, the rain had turned the city into a washed-out memory, but inside St. Jude Memorial Hospital, the air still felt bruised. Mr. Lewis was alive. That was the first mercy. The second was that he had not woken. Daniel stood outside the intensive care unit with his hands buried in his coat pockets, staring through the glass as if sheer will could pull the old janitor back to consciousness. Arthur Lewis looked smaller than he had in the pharmacy, smaller than he had in memory, his grey hair flattened by the hospital pillow, his face pale beneath the web of bandages. A machine breathed for him in soft mechanical pulses. Emma stood beside Daniel in a dark coat, her expression composed in the way only very wealthy people or very wounded people could manage. She had arrived before dawn, bringing a hospital administrator, a private security team, and a quiet efficiency that made everyone move faster without understanding why. But this time, she did not simply decide. She turned to Daniel and asked, very calmly, "What do you think we should do first?" It was such a simple question that it almost undid him. Not what do you need from me? Not I already handled it. What do you think? Daniel looked at her. Her face was tired, and for once she wasn't hiding it well enough. There were shadows under her eyes, the kind that came from staying awake too long with too many thoughts. He had seen Emma command boardrooms, silence reporters, and make people 3 times her age shrink under her gaze. Yet here, in the white hospital hallway, she looked most powerful when she was willing to be uncertain. "We need someone watching the room," Daniel said. "And if the accident wasn't random, we need the footage before it disappears." Emma nodded once. "Already requested. You move quickly. Only when I'm afraid." The honesty in her voice landed between them and stayed there. Daniel glanced back through the glass. "Will he survive? They think so." She lowered her voice. "But they don't know when he'll wake." He hated that helplessness. He hated the old feeling returning, the same helplessness he had seen in the families at his pharmacy when a bill was too high, a diagnosis too late, a door too heavy to push open. Money could buy a room, a guard, an expert, but not certainty. Emma seemed to read the thought in his face. "Come with me," she said. She led him to the small hospital cafeteria, nearly empty except for a sleepy nurse and a man eating toast over a pile of forms. Emma ordered tea for Daniel and a plain breakfast plate without asking whether he wanted it. When it arrived, he stared at the food. "You haven't eaten," she said. "I'm not the one who was up all night arranging half the hospital. And yet you're still the one I'm worried about." He almost smiled, but the strain in his chest wouldn't let him. He picked up his fork because she was looking at him as if it mattered. That, too, was new. Not the food, the being noticed. Across the table, Emma rested one hand against the rim of her cup. Grace found something. Daniel looked up. The car registered to a shell company. Paper trail ends at a consulting firm that only exists on invoices and a law office that bills for strategic privacy management. The shell company is tied to Whitmore Group subsidiaries. Richard's name hung there like a polished blade. Daniel's jaw tightened. So it was him. Not proof enough yet. Emma said enough to frighten anyone honest. Richard denied everything by 8 a.m. He called 3 journalists before breakfast and told them, "I'm manufacturing an attack on an old family because I cannot compete fairly." Daniel let out a bitter breath. That sounds exactly like him. It sounds like systems that protect men like him, Emma said, and the sudden chill in her voice made the table seem colder. He doesn't need to prove I'm lying. He only needs to make people tired of listening. Daniel watched her hands. They were steady, but he knew by then that stillness in Emma was often a kind of armor. "You believe this goes deeper than Richard?" "I believe he knows who benefits if Arthur never speaks." The answer came too quickly, which meant it had been living in her mind for hours. Daniel set down his fork. "And if he wakes?" Emma's gaze flickered. "Then maybe this stops being a whisper." Neither of them said the more frightening part, or becomes a war. By afternoon, Grace Lynn sent a message with 3 screenshots and 1 line of text that made Emma go completely still. "Found the company paper ownership points to Whitmore Legal Counsel. I'm pulling contracts now." Emma read the message twice, then showed Daniel the screen. He leaned in, eyes narrowing at the details. "This is enough to tie the vehicle to them?" "Not in court," Emma said, "but enough to pressure." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's still something." Emma looked at him then, not at the evidence but at his face, as if checking whether he was beginning to disappear inside all this damage. She had learned in these last days to do the practical things she once outsourced to her staff. She arranged for Mr. Lewis's wife to have a nearby guest suite paid, under a foundation name that would never reach the public record. She had one of her assistants send groceries to the janitor's family apartment. She did it quietly, without a speech, without claiming virtue. When Daniel found out, he said, "You didn't have to do that." Emma's expression stayed soft, but her voice carried the weight of an old wound. "I know what it means to have trouble become public. I won't let his family have to watch strangers turn grief into a story." He had no answer for that. For a moment, they simply stood in the hospital corridor, 2 people from completely different worlds stitched together by the ugly persistence of the same memory. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked down and felt his stomach drop. The first message was from a number he didn't know. Then another. Then his social media alerts erupted like static. "Small town parasite, fake good man. Ask your patients what you're hiding. Pharmacy license review incoming." He stared at the screen, feeling his pulse thud in his throat. Emma saw the change in his face immediately. "What is it?" He turned the phone toward her. Her eyes darkened. "They're moving against you." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course they are." By the time Daniel reached his pharmacy, the front windows were already crowded with curiosity seekers and one local blogger filming from the sidewalk. Someone had posted his address online. Someone else had pulled old comments from years ago, twisting them into accusations that he had sold controlled medication improperly. The story spread too quickly to be organic, too neatly to be accidental. Inside, his staff looked shaken. One of the pharmacy assistants handed him a printed notice from the state board saying, a routine compliance review was being initiated. Routine, Daniel thought, a lovely word for a knife. He was still reading it when Emma called. "Don't answer anyone before I get there," she said. "Daniel, listen to me." Her voice was low, urgent, steadier than his own breathing. "Do not face this alone." That should have been comforting. Instead, it scared him because he knew what it meant to stand beside her. It meant becoming visible, and visibility for Emma Vale was a dangerous thing. When she arrived, she came without a crowd. Just Grace, one driver, and a face that had gone distant in the way it did when she sensed a threat closing in. Daniel caught the attention of his younger assistant, told her to keep the front desk calm, and led Emma to the back office. "I can push them back," she said immediately. I can call the board, the mayor's office, the hospital donors, anyone with influence. And they'll say I'm being protected because of you, Daniel replied. Emma went quiet. He saw the conflict in her face before she concealed it. She hated that he was right. Before she could answer, Grace stepped into the doorway, holding her phone. Emma, I found something else. Emma turned. What now? Grace swallowed once. Regulators are on their way to Daniel's pharmacy, not the board enforcement. The room seemed to contract. Daniel frowned. On what basis? Grace's mouth tightened. Anonymous complaint. They received an allegation of illegal storage. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Emma said, very softly, how much time? Less than 20 minutes. Daniel stared at her. He understood now, in the way one understands the shape of a trap only after the floor has already opened. They timed this, yes, Emma said, and her voice had gone very still. To make the search look legitimate. She reached for her phone, but Daniel caught her wrist. If you call them now, they'll say I'm using you to interfere. I don't care what they say. I do. He looked at her, and for a moment the fear in him was sharper than the anger. Emma, if you step in too hard, they'll use me to hurt you. The words hung between them. Then Emma did something she rarely did. She listened without interrupting, without defending herself, without building a wall. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than a confession. Then tell me what you want. Daniel looked at the long room behind the office, at the shelves, the records, the rows of medicine that had built his life, one honest prescription at a time. He thought of Arthur in the hospital, of the online strangers calling him a fraud, of the way power always seemed to arrive wrapped in procedure. And then he looked back at Emma. I want you here, he said. Her eyes changed just slightly. Before either of them could say more, the front door opened. Several men and women in regulatory jackets stepped into the pharmacy, flashing credentials, carrying folders, moving with the brisk certainty of people who believed the answer was already decided. The lead inspector called Daniel's name. We have a warrant to search the premises. Emma straightened, the old billionaire composure settling around her like a tailored coat. But her hand, when it brushed Daniel's sleeve, was warm and unmistakably human. He walked forward with her beside him. The search began at the counter, then the cabinets, then the back storage room where the air smelled faintly of cardboard and disinfectant. Daniel answered every question carefully, his voice level by force rather than comfort. Emma said almost nothing, but she watched everything, and so did Grace. Then one of the inspectors opened a sealed box at the back shelf. He paused. What is it? Daniel asked. The man's face hardened as he lifted out a bottle with a label that did not belong to any inventory Daniel had ever stocked. Emma's breath stopped. The inspector held it up between two fingers. Illegal medication, he said. And in that moment, with the fluorescent lights buzzing above them, and the entire room staring as if the truth had just become obvious, Daniel understood exactly how far someone had gone to destroy him. The first call from the licensing board came before the reporters. Daniel stood behind the counter with the inspector's seizure form still in his hand, reading the same line over and over, as if the words might change under enough pressure. Temporary suspension pending investigation. The pharmacy license holder, Daniel Hart, barred from practice effective immediately. It did not feel real. It felt like a sentence someone else had received in a different life. One that only happened on television or in the stories people told after they had already survived them. But then he looked up and saw the empty space where his father's framed photo usually sat behind the register, the place his mother used to dust every Sunday, and the truth hit him with a quiet force that left no sound at all. This was not just his job. This was the only room in the world where his father's hands still seemed present. The shelves his father had arranged by memory, the bell above the door that had rung for 20 years, the stubborn little square of neighborhood life that had paid school fees, medicine bills, rent, and grief alike. Now it was being stripped from him by one planted bottle and a lie hidden in plain sight. By evening, the official notice had already been posted. By the next morning, the neighbors were reading it on their way to work, pretending not to stare too long when Daniel stepped outside. A few people came in anyway, not for medicine but for rumors. Others crossed to the opposite sidewalk. He had spent years being the pharmacist everyone trusted, the man who knew when a child had a fever before the mother finished speaking. In a single day, he had become a cautionary story. Emma stayed longer than he wanted her to, not because she was careless, but because she was Emma. When the crisis formed around her, she became impossibly calm, all the precision of a woman who had learned to survive by controlling every edge of a room. She made calls in low, efficient tones. She had Grace gather every record, every receipt, every camera angle from nearby businesses. She said the best legal team in the city would be there before midnight. Daniel heard her, and something in him tightened. When they were finally alone, the pharmacy dark behind them, and the street lamps throwing a thin amber line across the pavement, he turned to her with a face that looked older than it had that morning. "I don't want your lawyers." Emma's expression changed first to surprise, then concern. "Daniel, no." His voice was quiet, but it had the hard edge of someone holding himself together by force. "I know what you think you're doing. I know you want to fix it. I am trying to help you." "I know," he swallowed once. "That's the problem." The wind moved softly past them. Somewhere down the street, a bus exhaled at a stop. Emma stood very still, her coat pulled tight around her, her hair pinned with the kind of care that suggested she had not slept. She looked like a woman carved from composure, but her eyes were tired in a way that could not be hidden by good tailoring. Daniel laughed once without humor. "You always reach for the biggest solution. In the room, money, lawyers, pressure. You think if you move fast enough, nothing can touch you." Her jaw tightened. "And you think pride is more noble than being destroyed?" "No," he shook his head. "I think dignity matters." The word landed between them like glass. Emma's gaze sharpened. "You think I don't understand that?" He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time since the search, his hurt had nowhere left to go except directly toward the truth. "Do you?" he asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like the moment something goes wrong, you pay for it. You pay to make it vanish. You pay to keep people quiet. You pay so no one sees the mess." Her face went pale. "That's not what I mean," he said. But the damage had already begun, because now he could hear how cruel his own words sounded and could not pull them back. "I'm not one of your problems to be solved. Emma, I'm not some poor man you rescue to make yourself feel better." For a second, something in her expression broke cleanly. Not dramatically, not in tears. Worse than that, it was the tiny instinctive flinch of a woman who had been judged exactly where she was most tender. "I never said you were, but you act like it." Silence spread between them, not the kind that heals, the kind that exposes. Emma's voice, when it came, was quiet enough to be almost controlled. "And you act like accepting help makes you lesser." He stared at her. She had hit too close. "Maybe," he said finally, "maybe because I know what it's like to need help and have it come with a price." She did not answer. He could see the conflict in her face, the part of her that wanted to defend herself, and the part that knew he was not entirely wrong. That was what made this hurt more. If she had been arrogant, he could have fought her. But Emma never sounded arrogant when she was most dangerous. She sounded certain, protective, used to carrying the whole weight of the world alone. "At last," she said, "if you want me gone, say it." When he did, his voice was rough. "I want the person I'm talking to trust me enough, not to turn my life off into a project." Emma closed her eyes for one brief moment. When she opened them again, she looked almost unfamiliar in her restraint. "Fine," she said. "I won't stay." And then she left. He watched her walk to the car without turning back. Grace hovered near the curb, uncertain whether to follow or wait. And then she glanced at Daniel with a sympathy that only made the ache worse. The door shut. The taillights disappeared. The pharmacy lights went out an hour later. Daniel stayed anyway, sitting in the dimness of the back room, elbows on his knees, staring at his own hands. His father had once told him that a good man could lose money, lose time, even lose his temper, and still remain himself. But losing the pharmacy felt like losing the shape of himself. The neighborhood knew him because of this place. His grief lived here. His competence lived here. The calm voice he used with frightened patience was built in these aisles. Now even that could be taken. He slept badly, if he slept at all. By the next evening the street was nearly empty when Emma returned. Not in a car with a lawyer, not with a stack of documents or an entourage. She came alone, walking slowly in the thin cold light, her heels quiet on the sidewalk. She stopped outside the pharmacy and stood there for a moment, as if she were gathering the courage to enter a room where she no longer knew the rules. Daniel opened the door before she could knock. They looked at each other across the narrow threshold. "I'm not here to argue," she said. He almost said something sharp in response, but the exhaustion in her face stopped him. "Then why are you here?" "Because I was wrong." That alone made him blink. Emma looked past him briefly into the darkened pharmacy, at the shelves and the empty counter, and the space where his father's photo had once stood. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "You were right," she said. "I do use money like a shield. I use it before anyone can tell me I'm not enough, before they can make me small." Daniel said nothing. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if the night air had gone suddenly colder. "I've spent years believing that if I could build something large enough, beautiful enough, untouchable enough, then nobody would ever be able to drag me back to who I used to be." The words came slowly, each one costing her. "My mother worked until her hands cracked. We counted coins for rice. I know what it means to stand in a store and pretend you're not hungry, because hunger is embarrassing when other people have enough. I know what it means to be looked at like your clothes are proof of your worth." She swallowed. "When I was accused, I learned something worse." Daniel's chest tightened. Emma looked directly at him then, and for the first time her voice lost its polished steadiness completely. "I learned that love can be taken away without warning." The street was so quiet he could hear the faint hum of traffic far off in the city. "They told me I was lying," she said. "They looked at me like I had always been guilty and just happened to get lost. Turned away. No one asked what I had lost. No one wanted to know why I would have no reason to steal. I was just Emily Rose, the poor girl who must have wanted too much." Her throat moved. "After that I decided love was unsafe if it could be withdrawn that easily. Then it was never really mine." Daniel did not speak. He could not. Something in him had gone still and bright, like a wound finally touched by light. Emma stood there, in the weak pool of the street lamp, and for the first time since he had met her, she did not look like a billionaire, or a public figure, or a woman who had everything under control. She looked like someone who had carried her old self inside her for years, as if it were a secret crime, as if Emily Rose had never died at all, only been hidden away so deeply that even Emma had been afraid to name her. And suddenly he understood why she had looked at him the way she did the first time they met again, with recognition buried under caution. Why she had gone quiet around ordinary kindness. Why the smallest gestures seemed to touch something fragile in her. She had not forgotten Emily Rose. She had been living with her like a ghost. Daniel's expression changed, not all at once, but in pieces, as if some inner lock had clicked open. The anger that had driven him apart from her began to shift into something else, something far more dangerous because it was tender. He looked at her with a new understanding. and Emma saw it happen. It frightened her more than the argument had. "You still carry her," he said. Emma's eyes shone, though no tears fell. "I tried not to." He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a breath that sounded like relief and grief mixed together. "That's why you knew my silence before I said anything," he murmured. "You never forgot what it felt like to be the girl on the other side of the room." For the first time that night, Emma's lips trembled. Then Daniel looked away, as if he needed 1 second to decide whether to keep walking deeper into this past or shut the door on it forever. When he looked back, there was something in his hand, a folded piece of old paper, worn at the edges, kept so carefully it had survived years without being thrown away. "I wasn't sure I'd ever show you this," he said. Emma frowned, not yet understanding. He opened the paper slowly. It was torn from a notebook, yellowed with time, the handwriting slanted and cramped in a way that made it seem written in hurry or fear. A list, a name half smudged, a line of numbers, and near the bottom, a detail that made Emma's breath catch. Before she even fully read it, Daniel lifted his eyes to hers. "I kept this from our school days," he said quietly. "It belonged to Emily." Then, with the same careful voice he used when he was about to tell a patient something they did not want to hear, he added, "It might tell us who really stole from her." For a long moment, Emma could not reach for the paper. It lay between them on Daniel's palm like something alive, fragile and accusing. The old classroom smell returned to her first, the chalk dust, the damp wool of second-hand coats after rain, the faint sweetness of cheap bread hidden in her bag because she had been too embarrassed to eat in the cafeteria. Then came the sound, Celia Whitmore's sharp little gasp. The teacher's confused anger, drawers opening, students whispering, and her own heartbeat pounding so loudly she had not heard herself deny anything. That page should not have survived. Emily Rose had not survived, not officially. Emma Vale had built a whole life on that fact. Daniel placed the paper on the small table between them, careful not to crease it further. "Look at the bottom," he said. Emma lowered her eyes. At first she saw only the handwriting of a girl she had once been, tight, cautious, always trying not to take up too much space on the page. English sentences translated into Spanish. Then a few notes in the margin. 3:40. Practice before oral exam. Bring dictionary. Her throat closed. Daniel watched recognition move across her face. "You remember?" "I remember Sofia," Emma whispered. Sofia Alvarez had been a foreign exchange student from Argentina, shy in a way that had felt different from Emily's own shyness. Sofia's loneliness had come from being far from home. Emily's had come from knowing she had no home to return to that felt safe. They had sat together twice after school, trading English phrases for Spanish grammar. Two girls outside the center of the room, grateful for a reason not to stand alone. "The theft was recorded at 3:45, Daniel said. That was what they wrote in the report. Emma's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. At 3:45, they had said she was inside the West changing room, stealing Celia Whitmore's necklace from a locked cabinet during rehearsal preparation. At 3:45, they had said a scholarship girl had finally shown her true character. At 3:45, a teacher who had once praised her essays had refused to look her in the eye. But at 3:40, Emily had written that she would meet Sofia near the library corridor. The library corridor was on the other side of the building, watched by the old security desk, open to anyone leaving the language classrooms. "I was there," Daniel said, voice low but certain. "Not with you the whole time, but I saw you. I was carrying medicine for Mr. Cole from my aunt's pharmacy. You and Sofia were sitting on the bench near the notice board. You had that green dictionary with the torn spine." Emma closed her eyes. The green dictionary. She had bought it from a charity bin for 50 cents. It had smelled faintly of smoke. For years she had forgotten it so completely that remembering it now felt like finding a bone under new marble. "Why didn't you say it then?" she asked. But there was no accusation in it, only the ache of a question that had waited too long. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I tried to tell Mr. Vance I'd seen you," he said. "I was mistaken." Then he said, "Even if you were in the corridor, you could have gone before or after Emma. My aunt told me not to get involved with the Whitmores. Everyone did." His eyes darkened. "I hated myself for listening." Emma looked at him then. Not as Emma Vale, not as the woman whose lawyers could make entire committees tremble, but as the girl who had once stood outside an office and realized that truth spoken by poor mouths did not carry the same weight. "You kept this," she said. "I kept it because I knew something was wrong." Daniel's voice softened. "And because you disappeared before I could find a better way to help." The room fell quiet around them. Outside, the city moved with glittering indifference, all glass towers and late traffic, a world Emma had conquered without ever forgiving it. By midnight, Grace Lynn was in Emma's apartment with her hair twisted into a careless knot and her laptop open on the dining table. She did not ask why Emma's eyes were red. Grace had worked beside Emma long enough to understand that some wounds did not announce themselves. They entered a room and changed the temperature. "Sofia Alvarez." Grace murmured, fingers moving quickly. "Exchange program records from St. Ormond Academy are sealed, but alumni pages are less disciplined. There are 3 Sofia Alvarezes in right age range. One is a dentist in Madrid. One is a painter in Chile. One is a conference interpreter based in Geneva." Daniel leaned over the back of a chair, the old page in a clear file between them. Emma stood by the window, arms folded, as if holding herself together. "Find the interpreter." Grace glanced at her. Already doing it. It took 4 hours, 2 international calls, 1 favor from a foundation director, and Grace's terrifyingly polite persistence before Sofia Alvarez appeared on a video call from a small apartment washed in morning light. At first, Sofia smiled with professional caution. Then Emma moved closer to the screen. Sofia's smile faded. "Oh," she breathed. "Emily." No one spoke for several seconds. Emma had been called many things in the last decade. Visionary titan, ruthless, generous, untouchable. But the sound of that name from someone who had known her before the armor made something inside her give way. "Sofia," she said, and her voice was less steady than she wanted. Sofia pressed a hand to her mouth. "I thought you were gone. After what happened, they said your family moved. I looked once years later, but there was nothing. There was nothing because I made sure of it," Emma replied quietly. Grace guided the conversation with care, but it was Daniel who held up the notebook page. "Do you remember this?" Sofia leaned toward the screen. Her eyes moved across the faded writing. Then her face changed, not with confusion, but with the sick recognition of someone. Seeing a locked door open. "Yes," she said. "You wrote those sentences for me. I had an oral exam. We met that afternoon." "At what time?" Grace asked. "After last period, around 3:40, maybe earlier. We were near the library corridor." Sofia swallowed. "Emily did not leave me until the announcement, until people started running." Emma's hand tightened at her side. Grace's voice remained calm. "Sofia, the official report placed Emily at the West changing room at 3:45. "No," Sofia shook her head sharply. "No, impossible, she was with me." Daniel exhaled a sound so quiet it almost hurt, but Sofia was not finished. Her eyes filled, and she looked away from the camera as if ashamed of the room seeing her face. "There is more," she said. Emma felt the air change. Sofia's voice dropped. Grace stopped typing. "What did you see?" Emma asked. Sofia closed her eyes briefly. "I had forgotten my scarf in the language classroom. I went back alone before meeting Emily. When I passed the side hallway, I saw Celia near the coat hooks. She was opening a bag. A brown canvas bag. Emma's stomach turned cold, her bag. She put something inside." Sofia continued. "Small, wrapped in a handkerchief. I did not understand then. Later, when they found the necklace in Emily's bag, I knew." Daniel's hands curled into fists on the back of the chair. Why didn't you tell anyone? Grace asked, gently enough that it did not sound like blame. Sophia's eyes shone. I tried. I told the exchange coordinator. That evening, a man came, not a teacher. He said I was a guest in their country. He said my visa could become difficult. My host family could be accused of violating program rules. My parents could be billed for damages. He told me that rich families did not forgive foreign girls who lied for thieves. Emma turned away from the screen, but not fast enough to hide the pain that crossed her face. Sophia's voice broke. I was 17. I was scared. I am sorry, Emily. I have carried it for years. Emma had imagined this moment before in harsher colors. She had imagined anger, vindication, perhaps the satisfaction of watching a lie collapse. But standing there now, hearing Sophia apologize from across an ocean, Emma felt only the terrible size of what had been taken, not just from her, but from every frightened child taught that silence was survival. You were a child, Emma said. They knew exactly how to scare you. Sophia began to cry then, quietly, with the restraint of someone who had learned to translate other people's grief more easily than her own. By dawn, Grace had secured a recorded statement. Sophia agreed to testify if needed. Daniel made coffee no one drank. Emma sat at the dining table, the old page in front of her, and Sophia's written declaration beside it, watching the first pale light reach across the city. Evidence, not rumor, not memory, not the desperate defense of a poor girl no one wanted to believe. Evidence. Grace looked exhausted but fierce. If we release this carefully, Celia's version collapses. The school board report becomes questionable. Anyone connected to the suppression will panic. Richard will move first. He already has. Emma replied, her phone silent all night, lit up with a message from an unknown number. A black car is waiting downstairs, 10 minutes. Come alone if you want your mother left in peace. Daniel saw her face and reached for the phone. Emma let him read it, then watched the warmth drain from his expression. No, he said immediately. Emma stood. Yes, Emma, if Richard is using my mother, I need to know. How? Daniel stepped closer. Then I'm coming. She looked at him for a long second. There were 100 reasons to refuse him. His pharmacy, his safety. The fact that Richard enjoyed hurting anything Emma touched. But beneath all those reasons was the old habit of standing alone because she had never trusted the world to protect anyone beside her. Daniel seemed to hear the argument before she spoke it. Don't lock the door from the inside and call it protection, he said softly. That almost broke her. In the end, Daniel rode down with her, but Emma crossed the street alone. Richard Whitmore was waiting in the back of the car as if the city belonged to his family by inheritance. His coat was dark, his expression composed, but there was irritation at the corners of his mouth. For the first time, Emma realized he was not calm because he was powerful. He was calm because people had always cleaned the blood from his hands before anyone could see it. Emily rose, he said. Emma sat opposite him, a faint smile. So we're done pretending. We were done the moment you threatened a dead woman. His gaze flicked, amused and cold. Your mother was not always dead. There are records, hospital records, applications for emergency aid, denials. A charitable wing funded by families who now sit among your most respected investors. Emma's pulse slowed in the way it did before a fall. Richard opened a folder and slid one page toward her. She did not touch it. She didn't need to. She recognized her mother's name, Rose Elaine, the date, the hospital. Her mother had died after 3 days of fever, breathing like each inhale had to pass through broken glass. Emily had believed for years that poverty killed her, a lack of insurance, a late bus, a clinic too crowded to care. Richard watched her read without reading. The hospital refused transfer because she was classified as non-compliant and financially high risk. A donor committee had influence over indigent care policy. Some of those donors later became early backers in your rise. Imagine the headline, Billionaire built an empire with money tied to mother's medical abandonment. Emma's fingers went numb. "You're lying," she said. But her voice was too quiet. "I'm simplifying." Richard leaned back. "Expose Celia, and I release everything. Not just to punish you, to poison every good thing you have built. Your foundation, your hospitals, your scholarships. Every investor will deny. Every journalist will feast. And every person you tried to help will wonder whether your mercy was purchased with your mother's suffering." For one suspended second, Emma was no longer in a luxury car. She was 13, standing outside a hospital billing window, holding a plastic bag with her mother's slippers inside. She remembered the woman behind the glass, not looking up. She remembered thinking if she had better clothes, better words, better proof that her mother mattered, someone might open a door. Richard's voice cut through the memory. "Let the past stay buried, Emma. You became rich because you understood one thing. Survival requires sacrifice. Sacrifice this." She looked at him then, really looked, and felt a grief so old it had become almost clear. "You think the dead can be used as leverage because no one taught you love without ownership." His smile thinned. "And you think truth is clean because you've never watched it bankrupt everyone around you." The car door unlocked with a soft click. Emma stepped out into the morning. Across the street, Daniel was waiting under the grey light, his face tense with restrained fear. She did not go to him immediately. She stood there with the folder. Richard had forced into her hands and understood the shape of the trap. If she protected Emily, she might destroy Emma. If she protected Emma, she would abandon Emily all over again. Justice at last had arrived not as a sword, but as a blade pressed against everything she had built to survive. Later that afternoon, after lawyers were called, and Grace began tracing the hospital documents with grim precision, Emma returned to her office. The city below glittered without mercy. Daniel had gone to check on the pharmacy after an anonymous inspection notice arrived. Richard's fingerprints, though never visible, were everywhere. Emma was alone when the elevator opened. No one stepped out. Only a cream-colored envelope lay on the floor, as if it had been slipped through just before the doors closed. Her name was written on it in black ink. Emma Vale, not Emily. Her heartbeat changed. She picked it up carefully. There was no return address, no seal, only the faint weight of something small inside. She opened it over her desk. A necklace fell into her palm, gold chain, blue stone, delicate clasp. The necklace Celia Whitmore had claimed was stolen. The necklace found in Emily Rose's bag. The necklace that had ruined a poor girl's life and given a rich girl the innocence she had purchased with silence. Emma stared at it until the room blurred. Inside the envelope was a single folded note. She opened it with fingers that no longer felt like her own. "Ask your board chairman who paid for the lie." For a long time, Emma did not move. The necklace lay in the center of her palm like a small, cold piece of weather, carrying with it the storm of another lifetime. It was lighter than she remembered. Back then, when it had been pulled from her school bag in front of a room full of wealthy girls and silent teachers, it had seemed heavy enough to crush her bones. Now it looked almost innocent. A thin gold chain, a blue stone, a clasp so delicate it could break under a careless finger. And yet this tiny thing had broken her name. Emma closed her hand around it until the edges bit into her skin. The pain helped. It reminded her that she was standing in her office, high above the city, wearing a silk blouse that cost more than Emily Rose had once spent on a semester of meals. It reminded her that she was no longer 17, no longer cornered in a dean's office, no longer waiting for someone important to believe her. But the note on her desk refused to let her breathe. "Ask your board chairman who paid for the lie, Victor Hale." The name did not strike her like lightning. It moved through her more slowly, more cruelly, like poison entering blood. Victor, who had been among the first serious investors in Vale Innovations. Victor, who had told journalists that Emma Vale represented the best of modern entrepreneurship. Victor, who had stood beside her at galas and whispered advice about old money, old rooms, old rules. Victor, whose hand had rested on her shoulder the day she took the company public, while cameras flashed and the world called her unstoppable. Victor, who had once looked at Emily Rose and decided she was small enough to bury. Emma reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled only once before they steadied. "Grace," she said when the call connected, her voice frighteningly calm. "Come back to the office now and cancel my morning." Grace did not ask why. She heard something underneath Emma's control, something raw and thin enough to cut. "I'm on my way." Then Emma called Daniel. He answered on the third ring. Behind him she could hear the faint sound of glass bottles, the bell above the pharmacy door, ordinary life continuing with insulting gentleness. "Emma?" She shut her eyes. For a second, the strength she had built like armor loosened at the sound of his voice. "I know who helped them," she said. "Victor Hale." There was silence. Not disbelief, not shock. Daniel's silence was the kind that made room for pain before touching it. "I'm coming," he said. "Know your pharmacy. Can survive an afternoon without me. You shouldn't have to stand in that room alone." She wanted to say she had stood alone before. She wanted to tell him that was precisely how she had survived. But the words did not come. Instead, she looked down at the necklace in her hand and felt, with terrifying clarity, how tired she was of surviving, as if tenderness were a luxury. "Please come," she whispered. By the time Daniel arrived, Grace was already in Emma's office, standing at the desk with the envelope sealed in an evidence pouch, photographs taken, security footage requested. Her usual efficiency remained, but her eyes were wet. "This was delivered through the private elevator?" Grace asked. Emma nodded. "Someone with access, or someone who knows someone with access." Grace's jaw tightened. "We'll trace it." Daniel entered without ceremony, his coat damp from the rain that had begun over the city. He looked first at Emma, not the necklace, not the note, not the spectacular view behind her. Just Emma, as if every other object in the room had to wait until he knew whether she was still standing. She was, barely. He crossed the room and stopped close enough that she could choose whether to reach for him. That was Daniel's way. He never took her weakness as permission. Emma looked at him for one aching second, then stepped into his arms. The embrace did not solve anything. It did not erase Victor. It did not change what had happened years ago, but it gave her a place where she did not have to perform being untouchable. Daniel held her quietly, one hand at the back of her head, the other steady between her shoulder blades, as though he could keep the past from pulling her backward. Grace turned toward the window, pretending to study the skyline. After a while, Emma drew away. Her face was composed again, but her eyes were brighter. "Sharpened by hurt," she said. "Financial records, old school board minutes, Whitmore charitable payments from that year, Hale's accounts, shell companies, donations, anything that links Victor to the cover-up." Grace opened her tablet, already pulling preliminary reports. There was a Whitmore Foundation grant to the academy. 3 weeks after your expulsion. Public record. But if Victor received private compensation, it may be buried. "It won't be buried deep enough," Emma said. Daniel studied her. "Emma." She heard the warning in his voice before he spoke another word. "What?" "You are allowed to be angry. I am not asking permission, I know." His tone stayed gentle. "But don't let them turn your anger into the only truth about you." A laugh escaped her, quiet and bitter. "They destroyed Emily Rose because she had nothing. They welcomed Emma Vale because she had everything. And now you are asking me not to want revenge?" "No." Daniel's eyes held hers. "I'm asking you not to reduce yourself to it." The words landed where no accusation could have. Emma turned away, pressing her fingers to the edge of her desk. Below them, the city moved in glittering lanes of wealth and hunger, ambition and exhaustion. Somewhere in that city lived girls like Emily Rose, working late shifts, hiding unpaid bills, walking into rooms where people had already decided their worth. I thought power meant no one could do that to me again, she said. I thought if I built something big enough, clean enough, undeniable enough, I would never have to be that girl. Daniel stepped beside her, not blocking the view, sharing it. Maybe power isn't never being hurt again. Her throat tightened. And then what is it? He looked at the necklace on her desk. Maybe it's being able to say out loud, what hurt you? And making sure the next person isn't silenced. Emma did not answer, but something in her shifted, not softened exactly, but reoriented. For years, she had treated Emily Rose as a liability, a locked room beneath the mansion of Emma Vale, now standing between Daniel's quiet faith and Grace's fierce loyalty. She understood that the locked room was not proof of safety. It was proof that the past still owned its key. They worked until night folded over the city. Grace coordinated with forensic accountants, legal counsel, and an investigative journalist Emma had once funded, but never tried to influence. Daniel called Sophia, the former school nurse who had remembered Emily's bruised wrists from the day security, searched her bag too roughly. Sophia's voice shook over speakerphone, but she did not retreat. I kept copies, Sophie admitted. Not because I knew what to do with them, because it felt wrong. The school said, the girl confessed. But she never did. She kept saying, please call my mother. No one called. Emma sat very still. Daniel's hand found hers beneath the table. Grace asked carefully, do you still have the medical notes? Yes, and a written complaint I drafted but never filed. I was warned I'd lose my position. Sophia paused, breathing unevenly. I'm sorry, Miss Vale. I was afraid. Emily Rose had once waited for an adult to be brave. None had been but Sophia's apology. Late as it was, did not feel empty. It felt like a door cracking open after years of darkness. Fear is how they kept all of us quiet, Emma said. If you're willing to testify now, I won't let them isolate you. I will testify. The next evidence came just after midnight, a financial trail faint but visible. A consulting payment from a Whitmore-linked private trust to a company registered offshore. The beneficial owner was hidden behind 3 layers of paperwork. But Grace's investigator found an old compliance document with one signature. Victor Hale. The amount matched the year of Emily Rose's expulsion. $200,000. Enough to purchase silence. Enough to redirect a scandal. Enough, in the eyes of men like Victor, to dispose of a poor scholarship student and preserve a donor family's daughter. Emma stared at the document until the numbers stopped being numbers and became faces. Celia's perfect tears, the dean's cold disappointment. Security guards turning out the contents of a cheap backpack. Her mother's hands shaking when the expulsion letter arrived. Daniel crouched beside her chair. Emma. They priced my life at $200,000, she said. No. His voice was firm almost. They priced their lie. Not your life, her lips parted. But no sound came, he continued. They never knew your worth. That was their blindness, not your measure. It was such a simple sentence, the kind of sentence no court would record, no newspaper would print, no shareholder would evaluate. Yet it reached a place in her that had remained 17 for too long. Emma leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his shoulder. This time, she did not cry like someone breaking. She cried like someone returning. By morning, the case had become more than a memory. It had structure, documents, timelines, witnesses, hospital records showing stress-related collapse 3 days after Emily's expulsion, proof that her mother had tried to appeal and been denied access, bank trails tying Whitmore money to Victor, the original necklace, now in a forensic bag, likely containing fingerprints, history, and the arrogance of people who had believed an object could vanish forever. But Victor moved faster than guilt. At 7:12 a.m., Grace received the notice, emergency shareholder meeting. Mandatory attendance, agenda, executive confidence review. Emma read it once, then handed the tablet back. Grace's face was pale with anger. He knows, he suspects. He's trying to remove you before you go public. Emma walked to the mirror near the private washroom. A woman looked back at her with calm hair, tired eyes, and a face the financial world trusted because it had never been allowed to see the wounds beneath for years. Emma had polished that reflection until it became armor. Now she removed her diamond earrings and placed them on the counter. Grace watched her. What are you doing? Choosing what not to hide behind. She wore a simple black suit, no statement jewelry, no theatrical elegance, only the necklace from the envelope, sealed as evidence, carried in Grace's briefcase, only the truth heavy enough at last to stand on its own. Daniel waited for her by the elevator. I can't go into the shareholder room with you, he said. I know, but I'll be outside. She looked at him, at the man who had known Emily when she had nothing, who loved Emma when the world said she had too much, and understood suddenly that chosen solidarity was not rescue. It was someone standing close enough that shame could no longer pretend it was the only voice. You once bought me medicine when I couldn't afford it, she said softly. I never forgot. His expression changed, pain and tenderness crossing it together. I didn't know it was you. I know, she smiled faintly, though her eyes burned. That's why it mattered. The elevator doors opened as they descended. Emma did not feel fearless. Fear was there, familiar as breath, but beneath it was something stronger than composure. She was no longer going to enter that room as Emma Vale against Emily Rose. Success against shame, present against past. She would enter as both. The emergency meeting was already full when she arrived. Directors sat behind polished wood. Legal advisors murmured near the walls. Shareholders appeared on secure screens, their faces boxed in digital judgment. At the head of the table, Victor Hale stood with his silver hair, immaculate, his expression sorrowful, in the practiced way of powerful men about to commit violence politely. Emma, he said, as if greeting a difficult daughter, thank you for joining us under such unfortunate circumstances. She took her seat without answering. Grace sat behind her, briefcase at her feet, eyes steady. Victor lifted a folder. In light of recent instability, reputational exposure, and concerns regarding undisclosed personal matters that may materially affect this company, I hereby present a motion to remove Emma Vale as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The room went silent. Emma's hand rested on the table, inches from the evidence he was trying to bury again. And this time, every person in the room was watching. For one long second, Emma felt the old room return. Not this glass-walled boardroom high above the city, not the screens filled with investors, not the smell of leather chairs and expensive coffee. She saw instead a narrow dormitory hallway, wet shoes, cheap laundry powder, girls whispering behind half-closed doors. She heard someone say, "She looks like the type. Poor girls always want what they can't have." Back then, Emily Rose had stood alone, with trembling hands, unable to understand how quickly a lie could become a fact when spoken by the right mouth. Now Emma Vale sat beneath the eyes of people who praised her in magazines, quoted her speeches on opportunity, applauded her donations to scholarship funds. And still, in the tightness around their lips, she recognized the same old contempt. They admired the billionaire. They were afraid of the poor girl beneath her. Victor Hale continued speaking, voice smooth as polished stone. "This is not a punishment," he said. "It is a necessary act of stewardship. Miss Vale's recent conduct has become personal, erratic, and adversarial. She has allowed old grievances to interfere with company stability. We have reason to believe she has concealed material information about her past, and now she is attempting to weaponize corporate resources against respected families and institutions." Across the table, Richard Whitmore leaned back slightly, as if he were an observer and not the hand behind the knife. His suit was dark, his expression grave. Beside him, Celia Whitmore wore pale cream, the color of innocence carefully chosen. She lowered her eyes whenever anyone looked at her, the picture of a woman injured by scandal. Emma watched them all without moving. Years ago, she had cried until her throat hurt. She had begged to be believed. She had learned that desperation made people trust her less. So today she would not beg. Victor placed several pages before the directors. We cannot allow Vale Global to become the instrument of one woman's vendetta. Richard's gaze flicked toward her. I respected Emma as a competitor, he said almost gently. But this has gone too far, accusing my family, harassing my sister, dragging a community pharmacist into a corporate war. It is reckless. It is tragic, honestly. Celia looked up then, her eyes shining. I don't know why she hates me so much, she whispered. We were only girls, there it was. The perfect cruelty of the powerful. To wound, then perform confusion when the bleeding was shown. Emma finally opened the folder in front of her. The sound was small, but it cut through the room. When I was 17, she began, my name was not Emma Vale. A ripple passed through the table. On one of the screens, a shareholder leaned closer. Grace, sitting behind her, did not move. Daniel stood near the back wall, with Sophia beside him, not at the table. Not pretending to belong to this world of votes and ownership. He watched Emma with quiet eyes. Not frightened for her, not proud in the simple way people were proud of winners. He looked at her as if she had already been worthy before any of them learned how to pronounce her name. Emma held on to that look. My name was Emily Rose. Silence fell differently this time. Not empty, alert. I was a scholarship student at St. Aurelia Academy. I worked evenings, cleaned classrooms after events, and ate bread from the cafeteria when I could not afford dinner. I was poor, not symbolically, not poetically. Poor, in the way that makes adults speak more loudly at you, as if poverty damages hearing. Poor in the way that makes every mistake look like proof of character. Celia's fingers tightened in her lap. Voice steady. One spring, a necklace belonging to Celia Whitmore disappeared. I was accused of stealing it. No evidence was presented to me. No advocate was allowed. My scholarship was withdrawn. My record was marked. My mother was ill at the time. The humiliation did not end at school. It followed me into every clinic, every job interview, every rented room. Victor's face had hardened. This is deeply regrettable, if true, but irrelevant to today's motion. It is entirely relevant, Emma said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to, because the same people who buried that lie then have spent the last months burying crimes now. Grace rose and distributed copies to the directors. Digital files appeared on the secure screens. The first page was an old disciplinary record from St. Aurelia. The second, a maintenance log. The third, a recently recovered internal memo. Emma turned one page. This is the original inventory report from the school dormitory. The necklace was never found in my locker. It was logged by maintenance 2 days later behind the radiator in Celia Whitmore's room. Celia's head snapped up. That's fabricated. No, said a frail voice from the doorway. Every head turned. Mr. Lewis entered slowly with the help of a cane, his shoulders thinner than they had once been, his face pale from recovery. Sophia walked close to him, one hand ready in case he faltered. He had been a records clerk then, the kind of invisible man institutions relied on, because invisible people saw everything. Emma's breath caught, not because she doubted him, but because seeing him alive, standing, speaking, made the past feel less like a grave. Mr. Lewis stopped beside Grace. I filed that report, he said. His voice shook, but not from uncertainty. I was told to replace it with a corrected version. The corrected version removed the location where the necklace was found. Victor's jaw tightened. Mr. Lewis suffered a serious accident, his memory. My memory was inconvenient long before the accident. Mr. Lewis interrupted. The room stirred. Emma placed another document before them. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Lewis was struck by a car after agreeing to meet my investigator. The vehicle was traced through a shell company connected to Whitmore Holdings. Richard gave a short, humorless laugh. Connected is a generous word. In business, everything is connected if you draw enough lines. Saw stepped forward. Her face was pale but resolute, the softness of grief replaced by something harder. "My father was afraid," she said. "He told me if anything happened to him, I should give this to Daniel Hart." At Daniel's name, Richard's eyes sharpened. Sophia handed Grace a small storage drive. Grace inserted it into the system. A recording filled the room, grainy but clear enough. Mr. Lewis's voice, older, anxious, naming the hospital administrator who had altered Daniel's medication order, naming the Whitmore attorney who called after Emma's investigation began, naming the board contact who promised protection if he stayed quiet. Victor's silver composure cracked for the first time. Emma looked at him. "That board contact was you." The directors turned toward Victor. He exhaled sharply. "I served this company for decades. I made difficult decisions to protect it from scandal. You were young, Emma. You don't understand how institutions survive." "No," she said softly. "I understand exactly how they survive. They feed on the powerless and call it stability." Daniel moved then, not toward Emma, but toward the table. He did not speak like a man accustomed to boardrooms. He spoke like a man used to telling worried neighbors how to take medicine, how to breathe through pain, how to trust instructions that might save them. "My pharmacy was audited after I refused to stay away from Emma," he said. "A prescription record was altered to suggest I dispensed the wrong medication. The same altered record was sent anonymously to regulators and the press. I had the original system backup because our local server failed that week, and I printed emergency logs." Grace displayed them side by side, the altered timestamp, the changed dosage, the administrator's access code, the hidden connection to a consultancy paid by Richard's office. The evidence did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like rain filling a cracked stone bowl, drop after drop, until no one could pretend it was empty. On the screens, shareholders began speaking over one another. A director demanded independent counsel. Another asked Victor if he had disclosed his relationship with the hospital foundation. Celia's innocent mask trembled. Richard's face went still in that aristocratic way that was not calm but calculation. Emma stood for a moment. She forgot the cameras, the shares, the consequences. She saw Daniel in a pharmacy aisle years ago, handing a hungry girl a sandwich he pretended was extra. She saw her younger self walking through rain with a plastic bag of medicine, ashamed to accept kindness and desperate for it all the same. She saw every version of herself she had tried to bury in order to become untouchable. "I built Vale Global because I wanted power," she said. "I will not decorate that truth. I wanted enough money that no one could corner me in a hallway and decide my life with a lie. I wanted rooms like this to open when I entered, not close. But somewhere along the way, I began to believe the world's judgment of Emily Rose. I thought if I became Emma Vale, no one could shame me again." Her eyes moved across the table, across the screens, across the faces that no longer looked bored. "But shame does not disappear because you dress it in silk. It waits. It waits until someone says poor as if it means dirty. It waits until someone calls justice a vendetta. It waits until a girl who survived learns to say her own name without apology." Daniel's eyes shone. Emma placed both hands on the table. "I am Emily Rose. I am Emma Vale. I was poor. I was falsely accused. I was erased by people who believed reputation mattered more than truth. And I am still the chief executive of this company until the shareholders decide that integrity is less valuable than old money." No one spoke at first, then one shareholder on screen said, "I withdraw support for the removal motion." Another followed, then a third. A director pushed Victor's folder away, as if it had become contaminated. Legal counsel requested an immediate suspension of the vote pending investigation. Someone mentioned law enforcement. Someone else demanded preservation of all communications involving Whitmore Holdings, the Hospital Foundation, and Victor Hale. Celia stood abruptly. "You don't know what it was like," she cried, the performance splintering into something uglier. "My family expected everything from me. One mistake and I would have been nothing." Emma looked at her, and the anger she expected did not come as fire, it came as grief. "So you made me nothing instead." Celia had no answer. Victor sat down slowly. For the first time since Emma had known him, he looked old not with dignity but with fear. Richard remained standing. His gaze swept the room and settled on Daniel. There was no polish left in it now. "How touching," he said. "The billionaire reveals a tragic past. The humble pharmacist confirms every detail, and everyone applauds. But before you canonize them both, perhaps you should ask Mr. Hart one question." Daniel did not flinch. Richard reached into his folder and pulled out a bank transfer record. Did he or did he not receive money from Emma Vale days before agreeing to testify? A murmur surged through the room again, hungry and uncertain. The old machine of suspicion tried to restart. Emma felt it, the familiar tilt of attention, the sudden readiness to believe love was a transaction when class stood between two people. Richard smiled faintly. "There it is," he said. "Your pure witness, bought and paid for." Emma's heart clenched, not with doubt but with the cruelty of it. Daniel, who had lost customers because of her. Daniel, who had refused her protection when pride would have been easier to soothe with money. Daniel, who had never once asked what her name could buy him. Daniel looked at the transfer record, then he looked at Emma. "It's true," he said. The room froze. Emma's breath stopped. Daniel reached into his coat and removed a folded receipt, worn at the edges from being carried too long. "I received money from Emma Vale's foundation," he said. "Not for testimony. For the community clinic fund my pharmacy administers every winter. It pays for insulin, antibiotics, inhalers, and blood pressure medication for patients who choose between rent and staying alive." Grace closed her eyes briefly, as if she had been waiting for this exact blade to turn in Richard's hand. Daniel placed the receipt on the table. "The grant was approved 6 months before. I knew Emma Vale and Emily Rose were the same person. The board can verify every patient invoice. I did not take money to lie." His voice softened but somehow became stronger. "I told the truth because years ago, a girl with tired eyes came into my pharmacy and apologized for needing help. I remembered her. I remembered that she deserved kindness before she had power, and she deserves justice now." The silence after that was not suspicion, it was shame. Richard's final move collapsed in front of everyone. Not dramatically, but completely. A legal advisor took the transfer document. A director ordered security to prevent destruction of files. Celia sank back into her chair as if her bones had lost their shape. Victor stared at the table, already surrounded by the consequences of all the respectable choices he had made. Emma turned toward Daniel. Across the distance between the board table and the back of the room, between Billionaire and Pharmacist, between Emma Vale and Emily Rose, something quietly finished healing. Not the wound itself, perhaps, but the belief that she had to hide it to be loved. The vote to remove her never took place. By evening, Victor Hale had been suspended pending criminal investigation. Whitmore Holdings' legal team issued a statement no one believed. Celia was escorted out through a side entrance, face bare of tears now that cameras were gone. Richard left last, his expression carved from hatred and defeat. But he no longer looked inevitable, only rich, only cornered, only human. When the boardroom emptied, Emma remained by the window. The city below glittered with the indifferent beauty of things that survived everyone's private disasters. Grace gathered the files quietly, then paused beside her. "You did it," she said. Emma gave a small smile. Emily did. Grace's eyes warmed. Then it's good she came back. After she left, Daniel approached. For a while, neither of them spoke. Emma was tired in a way sleep could not fix. But beneath the exhaustion was space. A clean, aching space where fear had lived for too long. Daniel stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Are you all right?" he asked. Emma looked at the reflection in the glass. The woman there wore a tailored suit and the face the world knew. But behind her eyes was a girl, in worn shoes, still standing. "No," she said honestly. Then she turned to him. "But I think I will be." Daniel nodded, as if that answer was enough, as if he had never needed her to be invincible. Emma reached for his hand. This time she did not care who might see. She did not care what headlines would be written, what polite rooms would whisper, what old families would call inappropriate. His hand closed around hers, warm and steady, the same kind of kindness he had offered when she had nothing to give in return. Outside, the city lights blurred faintly through her tears. For years, Emma Vale had believed success meant building a life no one could take from her. Now, standing beside the man who had remembered Emily Rose before the world applauded Emma Vale, she understood something gentler and far more difficult. A life was not truly hers because it was untouchable. It was hers because at last she no longer had to disappear to keep it. 6 months later, the Vale Future Scholars Fund opened its first regional office in a converted warehouse, 2 streets from Hart Family Pharmacy. Emma had chosen the location herself, over the objections of 3 board members who preferred a downtown address with better parking for donors. "Donors can walk," she had told them. "It will be good for them." The ribbon cutting was small by her standards. No orchestras, no marble. Folding chairs borrowed from a nearby church, a table of pastries from the bakery Emma used to pass with 2 coins in her pocket, and a banner painted by a group of teenage girls from the neighborhood who had been selected for the fund's first cohort of scholars. Grace ran the event with the same precision she brought to shareholder meetings, though her clipboard now held names like Maya, Priya, and Jasmine instead of merger terms. Daniel stood near the back, where he always stood at Emma's events, close enough to see her face and far enough to let the moment belong to someone else. His pharmacy had reopened weeks earlier, its license restored, its reputation quietly stronger for having survived an attack instead of hiding from one. Mrs. Alvarez had brought flowers on the first day back, muttering that she had never once doubted him, which everyone in the shop knew was a generous rewriting of history. When Emma spoke, she did not read from a card. 10 years ago, she said, a girl needed one adult to believe her, and she got a sandwich instead of a hearing. I used to think that was the world failing her. Now I think it was the world in its smallest and most honest form, trying anyway. Sophia, who had agreed to run the fund's legal aid clinic 2 days a week, caught Daniel's eye across the room and smiled. Mr. Lewis, walking now with only a cane and a stubborn refusal to use the elevator, sat in the front row beside his daughter. He had asked, half joking, whether the scholarship application required good handwriting, since his own had gotten worse since the accident. Emma told him the fund would accept it however it arrived, as long as it was true. After the speeches, while Grace corralled photographers away from the girls, who had not agreed to be photographed, Daniel found Emma by the pastry table, eating a bread roll with the unhurried appetite of someone who was, for once, not thinking about cameras. "You didn't mention Victor," he said quietly. "No, or Richard, no." She brushed a crumb from her sleeve. "I spent enough years explaining myself to people who had already decided the answer. I'm done handing them my whole story just to make my present make sense." Daniel considered that. What did you want them to hear instead? Emma looked out at the room, the folding chairs, the borrowed banner, the girls comparing notebooks in the corner, Grace laughing at something. One of the reporters had not meant to be funny. She thought of a girl standing outside a bakery once, counting coins twice, because hunger made the numbers blur. That surviving isn't the ending, she said. It's just the part nobody claps for. Daniel reached over and took the last roll before she could. I'll clap for it anyway. She let him outside. The afternoon light moved low across the old district, touching the pharmacy sign, the folding chairs, the banner with its uneven letters. And, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emma Vale did not feel like she was standing in two lives at once. She felt, simply and without ceremony, like a woman who had finally stopped running long enough to let one life be enough.